In this video, we'll be going through a very high-level tour of Xcode, like the project. So far, we've been using Xcode in playgrounds. Those are pretty simple. We're about to shift over into using Xcode for our projects, where we actually build apps. So before we do that, I want to give a high-level tour of the program. And this is just a super high-level overview. One, because we're going to be using Xcode throughout the rest of the course pretty much, so you'll be picking stuff up along the way, and I'll be pointing stuff out as we use it, rather than just data dumping everything up front. Also, Xcode is a ridiculously huge program. I mean, ask developers who've been doing this 5-10 years. They're still constantly learning new things you can do in Xcode. It's just so big. Not to mention that it's constantly being updated with new features and new ways of doing things every year. There are improvements, don't get me wrong, but new things keep coming. So don't be overwhelmed. Xcode is something you're going to learn and evolve with throughout your entire career. So again, this video right here is just the super high-level overview. The more you use it, which we'll be doing throughout the rest of the course, the more you'll learn it. So let's start off with this left pane over here that, as you can see, has our folder structures. Again, the playgrounds, we didn't really have a folder structure. Well, you can see my folders here. I have like managers, models, custom views. Here are my screens, and they each have the folders, that has the code in it. So file organization, again, we'll work on this as we build our apps. I'll kind of show you how to do that. But that holds this. But this left pane can do so much more. Up here in the top, you can see there's a lot of options, like 9 or 10 of them. The two most common ones by far that you're going to use are this folder hierarchy and then this search button or the search icon here. And here you can search your project. So like, when did we use table, if I spell it right, table view, hit return. Anytime you use the table view, you can see here. So it's a nice quick way to search your whole project. And then if you click on it, boom, click on it, it'll take you right to that one. Let's say I want to go to this one. Oh, there we go. And then you see all the table view sections are highlighted. So again, the folder hierarchy on the left and then the search are by far the most you're going to use. This one will show all your errors and warnings, and then the rest are for like debugging and breakpoints. We'll get into breakpoints a little bit later, but don't worry about a lot of this other stuff. They're for like advanced debugging, source control. As a super beginner, again, I would focus on the folder hierarchy and the searching. Those are the two that you're going to use the most. And again, to reiterate, super high level overview. This program is huge. It's impossible to teach you everything. And real quick, if some of you are working just on a small laptop screen and not a big desktop, you can make room here. So here in the upper right, you see the left pane is highlighted. Watch what happens when I click that. It hides it. Cool, now I have a lot more room. Same thing with the right pane, which we'll get into. Now I have a lot more room. Same thing, your debug console at the bottom. You can show and hide that. So if you need room on your laptop, there are ways to manipulate the UI so you can maximize your room here. But we're going to bring back the left panel again. Now let's talk about the editor, which is what you see in the middle, the code here, right? So actually, let me go back to the search because it's highlighting all my table view stuff, which is annoying me. Okay, there we go. So back to the folders. So the editor, and this is how I usually work. I usually have two files side by side. It's how I usually work. You don't have to. So here there's an X. You can see the editors are kind of separated. So you can close this one out and just have one screen if you like. And the way to add another one is this little plus button right here that you see. So add an editor on the right. You see, you click on that, boom, there's another editor. You know what? You want to get crazy? Let's add another one. How crazy do you want to get? I don't know. Let's add 4. So if you had a ridiculous ultra wide monitor, you could have 4 files, right next to each other, and that would actually be a nice productivity boost. I can't say that I haven't done that. And now, so let's close this out to make it not look ridiculous. Remember, I have my resolution on the screen blown up huge. So let's say you don't want it side by side. I don't know, maybe you like to work vertically. If you hold Option, watch this icon, you see the icon rotate, so you can add an editor below. So you can go top and bottom if you want with your editors, or side by side. And any mix of the two, right? You can have side by side on the top, middle on the bottom. So you can get real creative based on how you want to lay out your editors, but I want to show you that you can do that, again, because it matters, right? If you're on a small laptop screen, you may have one way of working versus if you're on a big external monitor. And I will point out, investing in an external monitor, if you are just working on a laptop, it doesn't have to be some crazy 4K, ultra wide, expensive thing, but just a 27-inch monitor, trust me, your productivity will go up. Life will be just so much better. I have such a hard time working on just a laptop when I'm working on a serious project. So something to consider. I'm not telling you to go out and spend all your money, but trust me, it is a major relief to be working on a large monitor when working in Xcode. And also another thing that's fun here, the icon to the left here, there's some options you can do, but we want to show the mini map. So this is a mini map of your code. So you have a super long file. None of my files are really super long. But this will give you the mini map. And you see, as I'm hovering my mouse over it, like it's showing me what function it is as I highlight it. And there's other ways to organize your code so that it'll have breakpoints in the mini map. So if you do have a really long file, which to be honest, you should try to avoid that. Like if you have a 1,000-line file, that's not best practice. But for some reason, if you do, the mini map is a nice way to kind of navigate through that quickly. And watch, when I click on this, we go right down to the bottom. Click on the top of the mini map and view did load, right back to the top. So the mini map is a pretty cool, that was new in Xcode 11, so pretty new addition there. Now let's talk about the simulator, like how you actually run your code. So up here in the upper left, you'll see I have a generic iOS device because I haven't selected a simulator, where you can see I can choose iPhone 11, iPhone 11 Pro, iPhone 11 Pro Max. I can run it on the iPad, etc. And if I scroll up a little bit, I have my phone plugged in via a lightning cable. So now I have access to my phone that I can run the app actually on my device. We're going to do the simulator just so you can actually see it on the screen. Can't see the screen of my device. But now, once you select your simulator and you click on that, whatever phone you want to run it on, if you're testing different screen sizes, now you hit this play button and that runs your app. And you see in the top, you'll see this progress bar. Depending on how big the app is, sometimes this takes a really long time. But anyway, the simulator will pull up here in a second. Here you go, here's the simulator as you can see. And it's going to run the GitHub Followers app, my take-home project course. So there we go, there's the simulator. You can use your app just like it was an iPhone here. So SALEN0400 to get my GitHub followers, pull those in, there you go. And the cool thing about the simulator is you can test various different environments. So let's actually move this over here so you can see the iPhone as I change it. This little button right here is called the environmental overrides. So if I want to go to, we'll turn interface style, boom, dark mode, click that, light mode, dark mode, light mode. So if you want to test your app in light and dark mode, and if we go to, let's pick a follower here, now you can also test your dynamic type. So you can see, as we scroll, you can see the type of our dynamic type based on a setting is changing live on our simulator. So this is a way for you to test various different aspects of your app, and then all these options down here. I won't spend too much time going through this, but environmental overrides are a great way to test your app in various different environments, so to speak. So to stop your simulator, hit that stop button, and then your simulator will be up. We're going to close it because we're pretty much done with that. Now I'm going to show you how to use a breakpoint, which is a basic debugging. Let's get our debug console out of here. Let's go to our user info screen. Basically the way this screen works is we pass in the user information and then we download that information from a server. So I'm going to put a breakpoint just by clicking the line. Just click on it, left click on it. You'll see that red thing. Well, it may be a different color based on your Mac settings. Maybe it's blue, but you'll click that there. That'll be a breakpoint. What that means is your code will stop executing. So let's actually run the app again, and we'll get to the point where I'm trying to pull in the user, and then the code will stop executing and you can debug to see what's going on. So here we go. We're not pulling in a single user yet. We're pulling in all my followers. So when I click on a follower, now we're pulling in that user information, so the breakpoint will stop. So watch what happens when I click this. I click this, and boom, breakpoint. Because what happened was I passed in the user info that I clicked, and on that screen, we're pulling up all the information about the user. Well, here's the network call that we're making, and then we got a success, and it went right here. So 65, it broke. So that means the code went into the success block of the switch statement, and then right here is where I stopped it. So now I can see, hey, I have a user. So here in my debug console, let me scroll up here, I can do PO for printout, and I can do user because I have the user right here. It depends on what scope you're in, but if I print that out, now I can see all the information about my user right here, right? There's the login. There's the avatar URL that we're pulling in. There's the location, United States, right? There's his bio, senior consultant, how many repos, right? All the information about that user struct that you may have seen in previous videos is right here live. So breakpoints are a way to stop your program so you can like debug and see what's going on. Oftentimes how you would debug is what would happen is that would execute and like maybe the user information didn't fill correctly, or something was wrong. I would breakpoint it here and be like, okay, what user am I getting back? And I would be able to dive in and try to figure out what was going wrong with my program. So that's the basic concept of a breakpoint to help you debug. And now, like I said, I've paused my program in order to like rerun it, because I looked at this, okay, everything's cool. Now you hit this play button right here, and that will run your app again. So now we're back to running, and the app's running like normal. But while you're stopped, the app is not running. It's kind of like paused. So there you go. That is the basic breakpoint. So stop the simulator, get rid of the breakpoint. Always make sure to delete your breakpoints too, because sometimes you'll forget to leave them in, and then you'll be testing your app and it'll just stop and it'll scare you. You'll think something's broken, but you'll be like, oh, I forgot to delete my breakpoint. Now, this GitHub Followers app that I've been showing you, we did this 100% programmatically in the course, so we don't have storyboards in this project. Let me switch to a different project to show you storyboards here. So open recent, open up Illuna. And here we are in Illuna. So if I open that up, you can see I go to storyboards. You can see we have multiple storyboards, as you can see here. If you've worked with Xcode before, maybe you're used to working with one storyboard. We're going to talk about why you might not want to do that. So let me open up a storyboard here. Wow, that's big. Minimize. So you can see here is our like our login screen for Illuna, and you can see the paths here, right? Because we have a reset password screen. We have an email verification screen for reasons that have to do with the product. So anyway, you can see this is an example of a storyboard where you can see you can lay out your view controllers, which, to put it simply, they don't have to be full screens, but most of the time they're full screens. So in storyboard, you can lay out your view controller. You see you can kind of make segues, that's what these little lines are called, to attach each view controller. It's a very visual way to lay out your app. And I have the different sections of this app broken out. You can see here's the patient storyboard. This is probably going to be huge too. Yep. So this is our onboarding, right? Where the patient is giving us like their medical information. By the way, this app has to do with like asthma for children. So there's like, what kind of inhaler do you use and all that stuff. But this is like our onboarding section. So as you can see, a lot of beginners like storyboard because they can visually see their app. However, there is a bit of a debate that I have a whole video on, programmatic versus storyboard, but I'm showing you the storyboard here, and I'm just showing you what it is, because in the next video where I talk about all the components of UIKit, we're actually going to be using storyboard. So you're going to get more exposure to that in that video. And real quick, let's actually zoom in here, right, on these buttons that you see. About sharing your location. You see they're just blue buttons. Well, remember how we had that custom GF button that was a subclass of UI button back in the classes video? What I'm trying to say is storyboards don't always have to look exactly like they do in the app. For example, this, you'll see when I click on this, I'm going to open up the right panel, more on this in a later video. Well, you can see this is a class of AL button, right? So that is a custom button that we have that will, round the corners, give it a background color, change the font. But on the storyboard, all you see is this blue button. So don't worry if you didn't follow that. The main point I wanted to show you was that, just because you see a blue button here on the storyboard doesn't necessarily mean that's what's actually gonna, show up in code. So again, the main point is what's on the storyboard may not be an exact representation of what's on your phone. Now, like I said, this project is an example where we use, multiple different storyboards. My rule of thumb, as you can see, we're kind of breaking it here sometimes, is that your storyboard should only have 3 to 4 or 5 view controllers on it at one time. And the reason being that just separates things out and makes it easier to work on, especially if you're on a team. You can't have this nightmare that you see here that if it's just one storyboard, like look at this, your whole app is on one main.storyboard, it becomes a nightmare to deal with. And again, especially if you're working on teams. So anyway, one big takeaway, use multiple storyboards and keep them small if you choose to use storyboards. And again, we're going to dive more into storyboards in future videos when we build our apps. So we will definitely get more practice using them. Again, just an overview video. The last part I want to point out about Xcode is this project settings part. So this, don't worry too much. This is going to be confusing. This still confuses a lot of even advanced developers, but this is where you have your, well, this section is pretty straightforward, but you can see other sections will be tricky. This is where you have your display name on the app, what version number, what build number, if you want to have it for the iPhone, the iPad, or the Mac, portrait mode, you can disable landscape left or right, right? If you only want your app vertical, you can disable that. So this is the basic settings, but as you can see, you get signings and capabilities, build settings, right? This is where you get really into the weeds. Again, don't worry about understanding all these build settings and build rules. Again, a lot of even experienced developers shudder when they have to deal with something on this screen, right? It can be a real nightmare. But anyway, I wanted to point out that section to you. But that wraps up the overview of Xcode. Again, we're going to be using this pretty much the rest of the course as we build our apps, so we're going to get a lot more experience with it. Just wanted to show you the main components. On to the next video. Today I'm going to show you some of the highlights of what's new in Xcode 12. Now I say highlights because anytime we get a brand new Xcode, there's a ton of little things that they add. For that, I'm going to link to the release notes. Go ahead and scroll through that. It's very long. Have a ball. But for this video, we're going to focus on what I feel are some of the more common things that people are going to deal with on a day-to-day basis. First, let's talk about this new look and feel of the design. Now, right away, I am on macOS Big Sur. I am risking it a little bit on the first beta. A question I got a lot on Twitter is, do I need to have macOS Big Sur in order to download the Xcode 12 beta? The answer is no. You can still be on macOS Catalina and download the Xcode 12 beta. You won't get this redesign, but you'll still be able to get all the features. So if you look here, the play button, the stop button, the icons got redesigned. Over here on the right, we have the inspectors. They're more spaced out. They got redesigned. The sidebar here, one thing that helps, especially for me and maybe people that, poor vision, I guess, is when I'm doing these videos, I got to blow my screen up so you can see it, on your phone or on your computer or whatever. Now, when you're doing your font and your code, you can do Command plus and Command minus. That's been around for a while. So that's easy to adjust. However, the navigator here on the left, you can never adjust that size, even though I have my largest font based on my display settings. Now you can change that. So if you go to Xcode, Preferences, here in general, you can see navigator size. Right now I have it set to small. You can set it to whatever the system is. So you can see that made it a little bigger. Now I can also set it to large, and if you watch it, it's going to get a little bigger. So see, it's not like a crazy drastic change between small, medium, and large. To be honest with you, I kind of wish it was more drastic. Going from small to large doesn't, I mean, it feels different, but it's not a crazy drastic change. But anyway, that's nice. If you ever felt your navigator was way too small, you can now adjust the size of that. I'm going to leave it on large for you watching at home. And speaking of sizing issues, those of you that work on laptops, if you go full screen, right, you have these inspectors on the right and the left, and if you're in SwiftUI, you got the preview. I'm on my iMac 27-inch screen, so things are spacious, but on a 13-inch MacBook Pro, things are tight. So oftentimes, you may click these icons on the left to get rid of the navigator and get rid of the inspectors just to have more room to work. Well, the cool thing in Xcode 12 is now, if you have your inspector hidden, just slide your cursor to the left and it slides out. You can navigate, you can search, you can do all this stuff here that you normally could if that navigator was always showing. And then you go and it slides away. It doesn't work with the inspectors on the right. To be honest with you, I don't know if that's intended or if maybe that's coming in a later beta version. I recommend if you're downloading the official version of Xcode 12, not the beta, give that a try. Again, I don't know if that's intentional or not, but the inspectors don't slide out, but the navigator does. And like I said, if you work on a laptop and you need that screen real estate, this is a lifesaver. Now let's talk about app creation, because now you can create multi-platform apps. So we'll create a little test app here. So File, New Project. And here you see, you have up at the top, multi-platform, iOS, macOS, etc. Let's do multi-platform and just make it an app and call this test for video. Cool. Hit next. Sure, save it to desktop. And make these windows bigger here while this is updating all this stuff. This is just a sample, a blank Swift UI. So what you'll notice here is app delegate, scene delegate. That's not a thing anymore. This is basically replacing your app delegate and scene delegate with this at main here. So basically this is now your app lifecycle. So that's pretty cool. Let's get this. This is just the basic content view. But what you'll notice here, let me start minimizing some of these folders so you can see, is I have an iOS folder, a macOS folder, and a shared folder. So the purpose of this is the shared folder, that is all your common core UI for your app. However, if you have something that is, obviously an iPhone screen and a Mac screen are very different, so your UI may need to change. So you can have specific files, screens, whatever, views for iOS and macOS in these folders. So that'll help you build these multi-platform apps. And the last thing I want to mention about app creation, or I guess app updating, as you know, Apple Silicon is coming out if you didn't see at WWDC. However, that is going to be a transitionary period. So your apps on the Mac are going to have to support Intel Macs and Apple Silicon apps. So the great thing about Xcode, as long as you build your project in Xcode 12, it's automatically going to build both binaries for both platforms. So you're going to be good to go there. And let's switch apps to GitHub followers here. And I'm doing this because I want to show off document tabs because I need folders and all that stuff with a lot more files than that previous app had. So now we're in the kind of like the workflow section of the video. video where I'm going to show you some new cool things you can do with your workflow. So the first thing is document tabs, which is a nice way to organize what you're working on. So in order to show the tab, you do View, always show tab bar. And then what you see at the top here, GF button, I get this tab here. Now on whatever file I want to click, you can option click it or you can double click it. I'm probably going to end up double clicking it 99% of the time. So double click search VC, there it is. Now you have this tab. Double click follower list. Now you have all these tabs, and it doesn't have to be Swift files. Let's go to, my XC assets. Cool. Let's go to my P list. There it is. So now you can just go through these tabs at the top based on what you're working on. And if you want to like a whole section, like I'm closing these tabs now, like say I just wanted like all my screens in this app, I can drag the screens folder into the tab and it opens up all in new tabs. So now I got all my screens in the tab as I'm working. So like I said, it helps you organize what you're working on. And speaking of that organization, you can have like multiple editors with different sets of tabs. So if I click this plus button on the right here, this pulls up another editor side by side. And let's say I want my screens on that editor. So there they are. I can get rid of the GF button one. So those are all my screens. And then let's say I want my model on this editor, right? So I drag my model folder. So now I have in this editor, I can go back and forth between my model objects. And then in this editor, I can just, navigate through all my screens. So again, it's a nice way to organize, what you're currently working on at that moment. All right, so let's close out this editor, close out these screens we don't need. We're gonna talk about code completion. Now, code completion is, I don't know, maybe a little difficult to showcase here, or the speed of it, but I'm also gonna show you like the simplified results here. So let's do this network manager, make a network call here. So network manager.shared, again, the speed may not be coming across, but what I can show you is look at this, the simplified results. Sometimes you're getting that autocomplete and the autocomplete is like so long that it gets like truncated. Well, here we just get very simplified results for our autocomplete. So that's also new in Xcode 12. Now let's switch back to the Swift UI app to show you some of the stuff they got going on in preview. I'm going to hide the inspector to really showcase it here. So you'll notice above your preview, you have this new preview toolbar, and this is pretty cool. It just puts things that you commonly use like just in a very convenient spot, right? You can run your preview right there. I mean, that was kind of below it, so that's not a huge change. You can run it on device by clicking this button right here, see preview on device. This is the cool thing. You can quickly duplicate previews. Like before, you would have to go down to your content, preview, type another one out or add one, like a little tedious. Now you can just, we'll stop running this. Now you can just click on this duplicate. There you go. You see the code got added right there, and you see I have another preview. And then right here, you can adjust the environment of it or inspect preview, right? So I can go, look, device can be, let's make this the iPhone SE 2nd generation. Let's go with dark mode, right? So you can dynamic type, you know what? I don't even know if I did dynamic type on this app, but we're gonna do extra large, right? So you can tweak, it's kind of like the environment overrides. You can tweak your preview right here from this toolbar right above it. So it looks like I'm not really supporting dynamic type. This was a simple sample app, nothing crazy. But you can see in my previews, I quickly duplicated it and I quickly adjusted the environment of it real quick. Changed the phone, dark, dynamic type, all that stuff. So again, this preview toolbar that you see right here, very, very convenient. And last but not least, I know a lot of developers rejoice for this. We have StoreKit testing. Like StoreKit testing used to be a major pain. Now you can test it without like deploying or staging your app, right? It's built right into the test. So I actually don't have an app set up with in-app purchases that I can like show you this. So I'm going to rely on the video from the State of the Union address right here from Apple. But you can see you go to debug, and then at the bottom, you got that StoreKit option, and you can see you have a bunch of options. Like you can manage your purchases, you can refund purchases. You'll see him like make a purchase here, and your app is updating in real time, all from your tests. So that is much easier and much less of a headache than it used to be. All right, that's the highlights of Xcode 12. Like I said, check out the link in the description for the actual release notes. If you really want to dive in, it's very long and there's a lot of little stuff. But this was the major highlights that I think a lot of people will use on a daily basis. All right, we'll see you in the next video. Today, we're talking about what's new in Xcode 13. We got some great improvements to code completion. Vim is now in Xcode. We have column breakpoints, some new additions to storyboards, remember those? And some nice design tweaks. And of course, we got Xcode Cloud and then the documentation compiler, or DocC for short. Now, Xcode Cloud and DocC are completely different beasts all on their own. So after I show you the day-to-day stuff, I'll give a brief overview on those two topics as well. Let's talk about some design tweaks first, because that's quick and easy. So the first thing you'll notice, and I'm a real big fan of this, is the folders and icons have a new look and feel. I like it. I think it's nice and clean. You may notice you don't have like the .swift file or .whatever file. You can bring that back if you want. I like the cleanliness of it. That's just me. But if you do want to bring back those file extensions, you go to Xcode, Preferences, in general, and then you'll see here file extensions, hide all or show all. Again, I'm going to keep mine hidden. I like the cleanness of it. You notice this top bar got a nice little addition too. You don't have to select your simulator or whatever right here. That is now moved over here, iPhone 12 Pro, right? This is where you can select that and then your schemes and all that stuff. And then there's no more long horizontal loading bar. You get the circular spinner. So some nice little design tweaks that, in my opinion, really clean it up. I'm a fan. Now let's talk about some of those auto-completion improvements I was talking about. And my favorite, that's what we're going to start off with, is the switch statement. So in most cases, your switch statement will automatically fill for you, right? We're getting a placeholder image here based on an image dimension, which can be, square or a banner. Well, I'm just going to retype this switch statement below so you can see it, right? So I type switch and then dimension, and you see in the autocomplete, there's a little curly brace version of it. Well, if I hit that one, it's going to automatically fill in all of my cases. So that's nice. What I used to do is I would type that out and then, right, I wouldn't type this and I would, wait for Xcode to yell at me, switch must be exhaustive. Then I would click this and then I would fix that and it would fill in. So I love this because it saves me like 2 to 3 seconds every time I type a switch statement. Big fan here. However, it doesn't, I don't know if this is a beta 1 issue, and that's a quick disclaimer I should say, is that I am in beta 1, so things may not be working perfectly, things may improve, things may get added, but we are in beta 1. The most common use case for me on a switch statement is switching off a result. Right, so you see here, we are batch saving records. We get back a result with a network call, right? You get success or failure, and then you act accordingly. Well, again, I don't know if this is beta 1, or I don't know if this is, not part of the functionality. But here, if I type switch and then result, like I don't get that auto completion of the success and failure case. So just wanted to point that out. It seems to work great for your own enums that you've created that you want to switch off of. But for something like the result case, it's not quite working yet. Again, don't know if that's going to come in a future beta, but wanted to point that out. But overall, love this change. Another quality of life improvement is that Xcode will be able to recognize what frameworks you need to import and then import them automatically. So here in the DubDubGrub app, we're converting a CK asset from CloudKit to a UI image. Cool, but you see here, we return a UI image here. So we need UIKit in our extension, okay? But let's comment this out, pretend we don't have this, comment out the whole function. Cool, we don't have it. Now I'm going to retype that function here, and you'll see it pop in. Well, let me scroll down so you can see the imports. Func convert to, I'm just say image. I'm just going to type this out real quick. Not the full signature here, UI image. And you can see when I have the UI image autocomplete, there's a little warning. This class is defined in UIKit. Choosing this completion will import the module. Great, that's what I want. So if I hit return for the completion, give me my curly braces, you'll notice UIKit got imported right away. And if we change this UI image to, text, of course, I'm just experimenting, right? Don't worry about the function signature making sense. But you see, if I click this text right here, the SwiftUI text is what I'm looking for. This struct is defined in SwiftUI. Choosing this completion will import the module. Great, that's what I want. And then now you see I have SwiftUI up at the top. I think this is great because I know many times I have tried to type something and I'm like, why don't I get the autocomplete? And it's like, oh, I forgot to import SwiftUI or import UIKit. And here, this does this for you. So big fan of that change. Next up, we have more auto-completion stuff with guardlet and iflet, right? When you're unwrapping optionals, a lot of times that will auto-complete now as well. So here's an example of a remote image loader. By the way, this is getting replaced by async image in SwiftUI. Super pumped about that. So all this code will be gone eventually, but we're using this example here, right? Where we make a network manager call to download the image. We get back an optional UI image. So before we use that UI image, right, we have to basically make sure we have it. So we unwrap the optional. Well, if I just comment out this line here, and you'll see when I type guardlet UI image, I get the autocomplete for the rest of it, right? Before that didn't happen, right? Hit return, now I get the autocomplete for my guard statement. Now, similar to the switch statement examples I showed, if the example is simple, like this, there's only one, works great. If it's a little more complex, it doesn't seem to be working that great. Again, I may be trying to do more than it's intended to do, or it could be a beta 1 thing, but I just wanted to point that out. And of course, you can have more complex guardlet statements, but again, for the simple ones, it works great. And again, a welcome addition. And for the last of the auto completion improvements, we have the singular version of for loops. So you see here, I pass in an array called moves. So if I do for move in moves, right, normally you have to type all that out. Well, it will recognize the singular version and autocomplete that for you, right? So if I did for move, right, you see for move in moves, there you go, it knows, and it completes my for loop. And I saw Paul Hudson playing around with this and thought it was pretty cool. It'll show something like for goose in geese, right? It'll recognize that goose is the singular version of geese. So in some cases, it is able to recognize that, and I thought that was pretty cool. Next, let's talk about column breakpoints, right? So we're used to the line breakpoint, right? You see, I just put it on 103. It will stop, before or after it runs this line, wherever you put it, right? But it's the whole line. Well, you'll notice, especially when you're using some higher order functions like compact map or map, or even combine, where you can like chain this stuff together. Well, just the line we're not gonna be able to debug that because we wanna be able to stop this, somewhere mid-chain. So to do that, right, let's say moves.compactMap, before I filter that, I want to make sure my moves.compactMap is what I'm expecting. And by the way, this is from my tic-tac-toe tutorial where I basically take all the moves, get rid of all the nils, and we're filtering, all the human players or all the computer players, which we're passing in here. So that's what's going on here. That way I can see what moves the human has made, check for the win conditions, all that stuff, just so you have some semblance of what's going on with this code. But let's talk about this column breakpoint. So if I right-click filter, go to show code actions, and then set column breakpoint. And then you see this little vertical breakpoint, right? I'll click off filter so you can see it. So now what's gonna happen when I run my code, it's gonna run this portion of the code and then break right here before it does the filter. So let's test that. And actually, so I have some moves in here. I'm gonna turn the breakpoint off just by clicking it. And by the way, to delete it, you can just drag it off. Okay, we won't add the breakpoint now. Let's run the program. I'm gonna make some moves in my tic-tac-toe game, so some moves are in there, okay? Now the computer goes, I go, computer goes. Okay, we got moves. So go back to the Xcode. Now put the breakpoint on the filter. So right click, show code actions, column breakpoint, there we go. And then back to the simulator here. We'll move this over. Now I'm gonna make a move where I block circle right there. Okay, the breakpoint broke right there. So I have moves.compactMap. That has happened, but the filter hasn't happened yet. So say I had a bug and I wanted to check my moves.compactMap. So I can do PO moves.compactMap, $0, hit return. Here we go. So this prints out my moves here. So I can see before I filtered, right, I've gotten rid of all the nils. That's what compact map does, by the way. It gets rid of all the nils. So I'm left with just my moves, and you can see I have like human moves, human move, human move, computer move, computer move. So this is before I filter it. So again, column breakpoint stops a line if you have something chained, so you can break before something happens in the chain and then inspect, debug, do what you got to do. So column breakpoints, again, another very welcomed addition. All right, next we have some error cleanliness. All right, so let me get rid of that breakpoint. I don't know, let's break this, right? Let's get rid of a curly brace here. That's gonna send everything into a tizzy. Okay, look at all these errors. Now you see how these are all in your face? Sometimes you may want that, but this also applies to warnings as well. So if you don't want all this clutter, there's a way to minimize these. So if you go to Xcode, Preferences, and then you see issues, instead of show inline, hit show minimized, and you see they all minimized over to the right. Now you can still see them, right? You click on it, you can still see what the issue is. There you go. But it is just not so in your face. So this is obviously a personal preference thing. If you want your errors and warnings to be in your face, great, leave it, don't do anything. If you want them to be minimized, now you have the option, so that's cool. And again, Xcode, Preferences, instead of show minimized, show inline, and there you go. Next up, Vim is now in Xcode. I'll show you how to enable that. So Xcode, Preferences, Text Editing, it's a little buried, Editing, and then enable Vim key bindings. And then notice on the bottom, you see kind of the little shortcuts you get down there to teach you how to use it. Now, if you're not familiar with Vim, Vim is like a completely different way to navigate via just keyboard keystrokes. Very steep learning curve. I tried it once a couple years ago, gave up very quickly. So I'm not a Vim user, but I know many developers swear by it and they say once you learn it, you can never go back. I'll take your word for it. But anyway, if you are a Vim person, that is how you enable it. Now you can use Vim in Xcode. A little bit of a warning from what I've seen on Twitter anyway, is that it's not 100% there, like maybe 90% of the functionality is there. And I don't know if that's just, again, beta 1, maybe it'll improve over the betas, or maybe this is something in every Xcode release, we'll see a release note that says Vim improvements, added this to Vim, because this is the initial launch of it, if you will. So again, if you're a Vim user, now you can use that in Xcode. by again, Xcode, preferences, text editing, enable Vim key bindings. I am going to turn those off because that is not for me. Now some quick updates to Swift UI previews. We got landscape mode in previews. You can tap this little button right there and you can see what your app looks like in landscape. And we did not account for landscape in the Tic-Tac-Toe app, obviously, but that's a nice way to test it very quickly. And then you click this back, you can see it's gonna keep rotating it to the right. See, now we're upside down, the notch is on the bottom. Click it 2 more times. There's probably a quicker way to do that, but you know, that's what we're doing right now. And then lastly, on the right pane, you'll see we have access to the accessibility indicator right now. But you can see here, upgrade to macOS 12. I can't upgrade to macOS 12 on my main machine. I can't take that risk, but I will try to get a screenshot of this on the video so you can see it. But essentially, it's a nice way to inspect all of your elements to see what you have and what you're missing for accessibility reasons. So it's a nice quick look to get your act together in supporting accessibility on this. Moving on to these storyboard improvements, remember those, right? First off, you see the nice little storyboard icon over there. Again, all the icons changed, it's pretty cool. Down here at the bottom in the canvas, you see we can get iPhone 11, and you can see we can go to the iPads, iPhones, we can switch back, iPhone 12 Pro. So nice little UI there to switch phones very quickly. And then we also have an accessibility pane here, right? Where we can click this and view dynamic type. Okay, so our storyboard doesn't quite have that, so let's change that real quick. Because again, this is my super beginner app. You know, we're teaching them how to build an app. We're not even touching dynamic type and accessibility yet. This is the very first steps. So let's go to our rules here, change the label here, right? We're hard coding the font. So let's change the text to, instead of system, let's do body. Should be all we need for right now. So get rid of this for the show. So basically what you're seeing here in the square, the rules, the value of each card represents, that is now body. So that will now support dynamic type. But what you can test now in the accessibility pane here, turn it on. Now, as I drag my dynamic type, watch the rules thing, right? So you can see extra large, XXL, XXL. Okay, obviously we're not supporting dynamic type very well. It completely messes up the whole screen, but you can quickly see how this works. Again, super extra small. What does your UI look like? And you can just drag the whole way. So that's really cool to test your storyboard apps for accessibility. And there's other accessibility things, right? Like bold text. There you go. Button shapes. I'll move this over here. You can see it has the underline on the button, on-off label. I don't think you can see the other ones, but anyway, you can just test your accessibility right in Storyboard, and a good one is the dynamic type, seeing that in real time. Very nice. Now let's talk about buttons on Storyboard, because buttons got completely revamped in a very good way, in my opinion, because I've written many a button subclass to try to get that default Apple look. Those can all go away now because they're built right into the new UI button API and button API in Swift. That's also built into Storyboard. So let's take this stop button. Let me get my right pane out here. So we'll click on the stop button and you can see on the right pane over here all this stuff. I'm going to actually make this look like a default button because before you had to change the background color right to the color you wanted. So let's get rid of that. And let's go up and make the text color default, right? I want this to look like just the default button. There we go. And real quick, you can see in code here on the UI button, I had to make the corner radius 8 to get the rounded corners, right? I had to do a lot to get that look. So back to the storyboard, there's a new property here in the inspector called style. And you see I can do plain, well, plain will look like that, gray. And you see you get that grayed out style, see on the button there. And then, okay, back to the button. This is the one I like, and I think I'm gonna use in a lot of my apps, is this tinted one, right? So you get that tinted with the dark color. That's good for visually impaired people, because sometimes 2 different colors don't contrast nicely, but this guarantees your contrast ratio pretty much. So back to the button, and then you can do the classic Apple button, which is, this is the button that I always kind of built myself, was this filled button. And then also you can see there's other things you can do. So of course that's the color, right? So foreground and background, you can change the colors. We'll make it green. So green and white, and then the foreground we'll make blue, just for, you know, example purposes. And then now that's the filled, right? Now if I go to tinted, you can see we get the tinted green with the blue. So you can customize this a bit on your own. But the last thing I'm going to show you is the corner style. Remember I said I had to do corner radius in code. Now we get basically small, medium, large corner radius. We'll do large corner radius. I'll zoom in here so you can like really see that. So there, that's large corner radius. And then if I click on the button, capsule, again, this is another very common style that you used to have to write some code to get. Now you can just get that right away. So the point is here, UI button got a complete overhaul and it's built into Storyboard to where you can just, you know, click some buttons over here on the right to get your button to look how you want. Now let's talk about Xcode Cloud. Well, first of all, Xcode Cloud does require a beta invite, which I don't have access to. But even if I did have access to it, it would be very hard to demonstrate because Xcode Cloud is very focused on teams. Things like continuous integration, continuous deployment. You can build and run tests up on Xcode Cloud on all kinds of various devices all at the same time. And then once they all pass, you can automatically push the test flight to go out to all your beta testers. So if you want to dive deeper into this, I'll put some links to the WWDC talks all about this. There's a few of them. But again, it's a very, very large edition geared towards teams. And finally, we have the documentation compiler, or DocC for short. To put it simply, this is a way for you to nicely document your code, whether it's your app or a framework you're building that other developers are going to use, to interact just like Apple's code does. For example, here I am in my CloudKit manager, right? If I was like, hey, what's a CK query? And I option click on it and I get this little quick look, DocC allows you to do this for your own code. And again, you can hit open in documentation and there you go. Your documentation would show up here as well. It also allows for articles and interactive tutorials similar to Apple's own SwiftUI tutorials to be built for your code base as well. So again, I'll link to the WWDC talks in the description, but this is another big addition because we've all been there, right? We've all tried to use a third-party framework. Documentation is not that great, so hopefully a lot of people adopt this and we can get rid of those struggles trying to deal with a third-party framework. So those are the highlights of what's new in Xcode 13. Of course, there's much, much more. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you in the next one.
The very first thing you'll notice about Xcode 14 is that it went on a bit of a diet. By default, it doesn't include the watchOS and tvOS stuff. You just get iOS and macOS SDK. Now, of course, you can check the boxes and install those, but if we're being truthful here, just between me and you, most developers aren't working with the watch or tvOS, so why include that in everyone's Xcode? So that's how we got that 30% savings and a much lighter download for Xcode. The first new feature of Xcode 14 I want to show you is a very nice quality of life improvement. As you can see on my screen, I have a crap ton of icons. Now what we can do, instead of having to create all these different sizes in like a design tool and bring them in, over here on the right, you can see you have iOS all sizes, still says Xcode 13 because I guess there's maybe a slightly different version for Xcode 14. But if you go to single size, you'll notice as long as you have the 1024 point icon, Xcode will automatically scale it down to all those other ones that you saw before. So instead of having all those icons, now you just need this 1024.1 and you're good to go. Quick note that, like I said, Xcode just scales it down. So some apps will use, different versions of their icon for the super small, like 32 by 32 version, just to make it more visual. So if your app icon is like that, you might not benefit from this, but I would argue most people's app icons can just be scaled down. So again, huge quality of life improvement. Moving on to SwiftUI previews. First of all, they are live by default. You don't have to hit like a play button or a run button, so they will update live. That is by default. But the big thing, again, huge quality of life, is the variants button that you see down here, this little grid looking thing. So if you click on it, you can click color scheme variants, and now look at my preview. Right, you get the light and dark mode side by side just like that, and you can click on one of them to make it bigger. There's a little back button up here to go back. Click the light one if you want to really dive in. Cool, so I can see light and dark mode. Orientation variants, nice. I can see portrait, landscape left. Well, if I make it bigger here, or I can zoom out of my preview. Either way, cool, I can see landscape right. Again, orientations, just like that. Now the really cool one, dynamic type variants. You're gonna see, we're gonna get a bunch. So you can see how your view will look with all the different dynamic type settings, just like this. Now, of course, before, you could add modifiers to your previews to show the different variants and have a bunch of different previews up there. This is just so much nicer. In the click of a button, you can see all the variants and see what kind of work you have to do for these super duper large sizes. Now for some code editor improvements here. So I'll make my preview smaller now because that's not important. The first quick and easy thing I want to show you, as you can see, we're in a settings view. I'll make my code a little bigger so you can see it. By the way, I know there's many improvements I can make to this settings screen in the code. That's not what this video is about. So keep your comments to yourself. I know there's issues. Anyway, we're in the settings view, but as you can see, we get the sticky headers. So bam, settings view stuck to the top. And here's where it's good because, right, my var body sum view, there's a lot of stuff going on in it. So you can see, I know that now I'm in var body sum view. As I'm scrolling down, I'm still in var body sum view because there's a lot going on. Still going. And then now we see we have a sign out of Google function here. So now that pins to the top. So that is sticky headers, a nice way to know where you're at in your file. Another nice thing, if you do Command-Shift-L to open up your library, and over here on the right, you see SF symbols, this little star here. SF symbols are built into your library now. I don't know about you, I always would have to go Command Space, SF symbols, open up the app like you see here, scroll through, find them. It's just a lot of extra steps. Now again, Command-Shift-L, pull up your library, hit the little star, and they're searchable too. So I can do sun, right? I can see all the different sun and stuff like that. So nice to be built right into the library. Again, Command-Shift-L, hit the little star, and you get all your SF symbols. And another little thing, and I don't want to like discredit the little things, right? Because all these little, again, quality of life, I feel like I've said quality of life so much in this video, but all those little quality of life improvements like really add up to a better experience. And another one here is in our simulators, right? You click on iPhone 14 Pro, you've had all these simulators, and if you have the watchOS and tvOS, you got even more. So this is nice. We have this recent section up here. So if you're bouncing between, like in this case, hey, I was testing the iPhone 8 and then the iPhone 14 Pro, your recent simulators are going to be right up there, which is, again, a nice improvement. And we can now see test flight feedback right in Xcode. So if I go to Windows, Organizer. Now this is over here, well, feedback, I already have it highlighted. Spoilers, we used to be able to see crashes, all this stuff. Now I can go to feedback and I can see, I'll make this bigger here, all my test flight feedback right in here in Xcode. And you see if I click on something over here on the right, I can email Jason Mitchell. But yeah, you can see all of your test flight feedback right from here with screenshots, email the user. Normally you'd have to go to App Store Connect and in Test Flight and dig for that. Now it's all right here. You also have the hangs, that is new. Now I don't have any hangs here. Well, hang logs are not available for macOS. So I'm on the macOS version. If I go to Creator View, iOS, I don't think there's any hang log detected. I'm sure Creator View does have hangs, but here's a screenshot from the WWDC video of what it would look like with hangs that you can diagnose. Again, this is all new in the organizer right here in Xcode. Okay, we'll close that and back to the code here. We're gonna talk about some autocomplete stuff here. So I made some room, as you can see. So now we get a lot of boilerplate code done for us, like member-wise initializers or codable conformants. So let's say we have a video object. This is just a real quick dummy object. Var title, which is a string. Var date, which is of type date. Var is live stream, which is a boolean. Var note, which is a string. Now with these basic structs, typically you get the member-wise initializer for free, but sometimes you need to type it out. So you would do init, and then anyone that's been developing iOS for a while has typed this out thousands of times manually. Now we get that for free. Same thing with like codable conformants. So we'll conform video to codable, and then you just start typing decoder right here, and you see you get the little curly braces with the dot, dot, dot. Now you get all this stuff in there, and then same thing with type encoder. Bam, and then now you also, when you do both of them, you get the coding keys. So like I said, there's just a lot of boilerplate stuff that, again, if you've been coding for a while, you've typed this out manually plenty of time. The last thing I want to talk about in this section is the auto-completion of parameters. Let me get rid of all this codable stuff just to declutter the screen and not be so confusing. So, a title for video is cool, a date for video, a live stream, most of it's not going to be a live stream, so we can set a default value to false. And then a note, most of them aren't going to have notes, so we'll have a default value of a string. So now let's say we had a function here, again, dummy code here, func create, and in here we're going to create a video. So let video equal, and then we'll initialize a video here. Now you can see down here in this one, is live stream and note is kind of grayed out and italicized. So if I just hit return, because those have default values, bam, I just get title and date. But if I go back here, what if I did want those values? There's a couple ways to do this. So video, and then if I hold Option, you'll see they light up and I'll get them all. So if I hold Option, hit it, get them all. Cool. Now, another way to do this real quick, and this is really going to come in handy in SwiftUI, which I'll show you in a second. But if you do video, cool, is live stream and note are optional. But if I start typing is live stream, you see that will light up. And if I start typing note, that will light up as well. So now I'll get them all. Now, that may seem like a contrived example when you're initializing those, but let me get rid of all this and go back to SwiftUI. And this is where this is going to be such a lifesaver. So back up here onto this list here for the settings view. I'm going to code fold it so you don't get distracted by all the messiness going on in there. So look, on this list, right, a common thing we do in SwiftUI is .frame. Of course, if you're dealing with like min width, max width, there's a whole bunch of them, but this is where it's nice where you can type it like I said. So if I did frame, again, you could hold Option to get all of them. Most likely you're not going to want all of them. But if you just start typing, min, max, you see min width and max width lit up. I can hit return, min width, max width. I know if you've been dealing with SwiftUI for a while, you've had to type that out manually because you didn't want all those parameters. So that is nice. And then an even quicker one, right? So say I just want to have the width of a frame. So frame, I don't want width and height. So just start typing width, bam, frame width, and you got your frame. So like I said, SwiftUI modifiers with a ton of optional parameters. You know this is very common in SwiftUI. This typing out which parameters you want, you don't have to type it all out. You just have to type a letter of it. So you see I just typed a W and then maybe another W. So now I'm getting how it's going through. The third W. So I got min width, ideal width, max width. So there's different letter combinations you can type to get what you want. You'll have to experiment with that, trial and error with that. but that is going to be such a time saver for SwiftUI. And then the last thing I want to show you is the build timeline. So you can diagnose, why is my build taking so long? You can really check it out in a visual manner. So before I do that, I'm going to do a Command-Shift-K, may even just be Command-K, I don't know, whatever. Clean my build folder, product, perform action, build with timing summary. So you click that, it'll build. Over here on the right, we'll click this to see our latest build. So you see 917 build is currently working. Once that is done building, I will show you the timeline summary. Okay, so the build at 9:17 a.m. is done. We click on it. I'm gonna collapse all this stuff real quick just so you can get the summary here. So this is like the build, right? Building all the targets, building all the packages and stuff like that, minimizing these so you can help or see it. Okay, so that's like the overall summary. Now, I don't see my build timeline right now. It may show up by default for you, but if you right click, show in timeline. Okay, put this on the right. Depending on your monitor setup, maybe you want it below, maybe you want it on the right. I guess this is big enough I can have it on the right. When I was testing this on my laptop, I just had to put it below. But you can see the timeline, and it is in milliseconds right now. If you hold Option and kind of scroll on your mouse wheel, you can kind of zoom in and zoom out as I'm doing it here. So instead of milliseconds here, let's do, by the second, right? Or you can keep zooming in maybe every 5 seconds, right? That'll really put up the summary of your build. But you can look and see like what is taking so long to build, or if something is egregious, something is really out of whack. Like sometimes your asset catalog can be like super duper long. But anyway, you can see the build of your timeline to, again, diagnose any issues you have and optimize your build times. Those are the highlights of Xcode 14 that I thought you would use, on a day-to-day basis. Of course, there are tons more changes. I'll link to the release notes in the description. Check those out if you want. We'll see you in the next video.
Before we start playing with storyboards and building our own apps, let's talk about what auto layout is. As you're familiar with, there's tons of different screen sizes, right? The iPhone SE, the iPhone 11 Pro, iPads, various different iPads, right? There's a lot of screen sizes developers have to handle, and that's what auto layout does. It's a constraint-based system that really makes our lives easier when adapting to all these screen sizes. And without auto layout, we would have to create unique layouts for each different screen size. Like look at this diagram of all the different screen sizes. We would have to be like, hey, on the iPhone SE or 5 screen size, this button should be 10 points from the bottom. But on the iPhone 8, which has a much bigger screen, it should be 30 points from the bottom. But on the iPhone 11 Pro, which is even bigger screen, it should be 80 points from the bottom. And that's only one vertical layout of one element. Like imagine your whole UI being different per screen, so it looks good on each screen. Well, thankfully we don't have to do that. And again, auto layout is the system that allows that. Now you may notice when I was describing that, I said points and not pixels. And that's because the various different screens in the iPhone, iPad family have different resolutions. So again, to make our developer lives easier, instead of trying to remember like, okay, this screen is a 3x resolution, whereas this one's a 2x, so now my layout has to be different. Like we just deal in points, and as you can see on this diagram that breaks down, the height in points, the width in points for each screen, by just dealing in one measurement, if you will, called points, that again makes our lives so much easier. We don't have to worry about different resolutions. That gets handled for us. So like I said, auto layout is a constraints-based system that helps us lay out for all the different screen sizes. What that means is, let's say I have a label and I want to constrain it so that it stretches so that it is 30 points from the left of the screen gap and then 30 points from the right of the screen gap, right? We want some padding on each size. Well, the width of that label is going to be different based on if it's the iPhone SE, which is pretty skinny, or the iPhone 11 Pro, which is actually a pretty wide phone, right? So that label will stretch so that it's always going to have a 30 padding on the left and a 30-point padding on the right. So that is a quick example of how auto layout adapts, or if you say, hey, center this vertically on the screen. Again, whatever the screen size is, it's going to center vertically. We don't have to say, the specific point coordinate where that should be. So that is a super basic example of auto layout. Again, we're going to be using this in future videos while we build our apps, so you'll get a chance to actually play with it, and I'll be explaining it more in depth as we get into it. But again, I wanted this video to just at least tell you what it was, and it's that this auto layout thing exists and kind of the idea behind it. One quick thing before we move on though is that auto layout, while it does help configure your layout so it fits on all screen sizes, is great, it's awesome, but it will get you 90 to 95% of the way. What that means is if you want your layout to look really, really great on the iPhone SE all the way up to the iPhone 11 Pro Max, which is the big phone, right? That's a huge difference in screen size. Again, auto layout will get you almost all the way, but you're probably going to have to tweak manually to get your layout looking exactly like you want it to look. And I just say that so you know in your head, auto layout doesn't do everything for you, right? It'll do almost all of the work, but you're likely going to have to dive in and manually tweak certain screen sizes to get it to look exactly how you want. So just keep that in mind. It's not the end all be all. It's going to do 100% of the work for you. But again, it's great. All right, moving on. When building our apps in Xcode, we're actually building our apps on top of a foundation that Apple has already built for us. If you remember in previous videos, I talked about the GF button that was a subclass of a UI button. Even talked about, subclassing a UI view controller. Well, that's an example of that. Like all the button functionality is already built by Apple. We're just building on top of it. And that framework that we're using is called UIKit. You'll notice it was UI button, UI view controller. Like anything with the prefix UI means it's part of UIKit, and we're going to use those components to build our user interfaces. So open up Xcode, create a new Xcode project, and a single view app. Not sure if you've deleted your previous test one that we used, but we can call this UIKit intro, if you want to call it that. Again, team, make it your own. Organization name, make it your own. Language, Swift. User interface, storyboard. So we could do Swift UI, more on that later. Right now we're going to make sure you click storyboard, and then we don't want to do Objective-C, we want to do Swift. And we're not worried about unit tests or core data or anything like that. So hit next. That will create this project. Save it to wherever you'd like to save it. I'm just putting mine on my desktop. And let's make the screen fill up here. So now click on main.storyboard here on the left. Here we are. Here's our first view controller. This arrow right here means it's the initial screen on the view controller. So this is what shows up first. Now to put it super simply, a UI view controller controls views on your screen to display. And most of the time, a view controller is an entire screen. You can create reusable child view controllers. That's more of an advanced topic. Just know that that is possible. But for the sake of this course, very beginner, our view controllers are going to be entire screens. So I'm going to make some room real quick. We're going to drag this to the left so I have a lot of room on my storyboard here. So I just have a blank view controller, right? If we run this app, not on my iPhone X, just run it on an iPhone 11 Pro, you'll see when it runs, we just have a blank white screen. There you go. Nothing's on there. It's blank. We're going to fix that as we add stuff to it, but go ahead and close that. Stop it. Oops, I closed it first. That's new in Xcode 11.4. I messed that up. I hit that little red dot up there. And so if you don't see that, let me run it again. This is kind of off the cuff because Xcode 11.4 just came out like 2 days ago. So now we have this toolbar above our simulator. We used to not have that prior to Xcode 11.4. So I guess, and I'm not used to using it yet, when you're running your app, if you click this X, it'll like crash your app like that. So make sure you hit this stop button first before you hit that red dot. Again, new in Xcode 11.4, brand new. So here we are in our view controller. Let's start adding elements onto our screen. So the way we can do that is this plus button up here. If you click on that, you'll get a menu that you can, you can see all the UI elements, right? Date picker, map kit stuff, WebKit stuff. There's a ton, right? We're going to start off with the basic stuff. Again, UIKit is very, very vast. Beginner course, starting off with just the core essentials here. So let's start with a view. So if you type UI view, and now you'll see this view here, you just drag it onto the screen. So a view is just that. It's kind of like a container, if you will. So we can also over here on the right in the attributes inspector, see background is system background. Let's make it system orange color for our view. So boom, there you go. There's our view, orange on the screen. Now, if you remember in a previous video, we talked about auto layout. When you put stuff on a screen, like you can put it here, but it's not constrained. But because we're doing this on the iPhone 11, watch, when I run this, you should see it there. Not sure, I guess we'll see what happens. I don't often build stuff without constraining it, so it's been a while. Yeah, okay. That looks like kind of how you wanted it to look. It's actually a little bit lower than we have it on here. But now, without constraining something, again, this is back to that auto layout. Let me run it on an iPhone 8. Run. You can see, because we haven't told it where to go, it's not where we want it to be. And this is where auto layout comes into play. Dang it, I did it again. I'm going to probably do that a bunch. I'm not even going to edit it out, just to show you the pain of sometimes when Xcode introduces new stuff and you've been using Xcode for 5 years, bad habits hard to break. So, all right, now let's actually constrain this view using auto layout. So down here, these buttons are how you set constraints. I call this one the TIE Fighter for obvious reasons, but let's click on the TIE Fighter and you can say, look, I want this to be, real quick, let's explain safe area. So the safe area was new with the notch phones. If you notice how the notch comes down and then you have the time on the left and the battery on the right, well, the safe area is like everything above the notch in the corner. So if you pin it to the safe area, it's not going to go above the notch and look weird. So we will use safe area. So we want to pin it, let's say 50 points, remember points, not pixels, from the top of the phone. So if you hit add one constraint, now you'll see that added it, but it shows up in red. A rule of thumb is that an item should have 4 constraints. If you find yourself having 7 constraints on one item, you're probably doing it wrong. Labels can have 3 sometimes with intrinsic height. Don't worry about that. Again, the rule of thumb, 4 constraints. So let's set those 4 constraints because you need to give it a height, a width, an X coordinate, and a Y coordinate. Those are typically the 4 constraints you need. So we gave it a Y coordinate, right? Because we told it 50 points from the top of the safe area. So now let's go back here. Let's give it a height and width. We want to make it 200 by 200. So that's our height width. Now we need to give it an X coordinate, right? Horizontal. Well, we're going to center that. Well, you can't do that in this menu here. So add 2 constraints. All right, so it's still red. We're almost there. In these two little bars to the left of the TIE Fighter called align, that is where you get, you see, horizontally center in container and vertically center in container. So we want to center this horizontally. So we click on that, add a constraint. Now we're all blue. Everything's good. We have our 4 constraints on this. So now what we're telling auto layout is that this is always going to be 50 points from the top of the screen, no matter how big the screen is. We're always going to center it, and it's always going to be 200 by 200. So again, whether I run it on the iPhone 11 Pro Max, we're going to go with the biggest phone size. Okay, there it is, 50 points from the top. And then the same thing, if we stop it, run it on the iPhone 8. Oh, got to go to our simulator. Oh, there it is. Again, 50 points from the top, centered. So that is what auto layout does. It helps you position your elements no matter what screen size. And actually, you know what? I'm not seeing the iPhone SE. Dang it, I keep doing that. Leaving it in. The iPhone SE isn't on here, so we can add additional simulators as you see, because the iPhone SE is that small iPhone 5 screen size, at least as of now. Allegedly, the iPhone 9 is going to come out and replace the iPhone SE, but the small iPhone 5 screen size. So you can hit add additional simulators, and then you hit this little plus button on the left, and so the simulator name, iPhone SE, and then here's where you can any simulator you want. Watch when I click this. Oh man, a whole bunch of devices you can add. We want to add the iPhone SE because again, that's that little iPhone 5 screen size. You can even specify an iOS version. You have to download more simulators, but I wouldn't mess with that now. That's pretty advanced, if you want a specific version of iOS to test against. So hit create, and then now we have the iPhone SE simulator. So now you see iPhone SE pops up here. So now we click on that, and now let's run it. This is a way to test, UI on various different screen sizes. So here you see the small iPhone SE. Well, it's not small, it's actually huge. Let's make it how it would actually look next to the old iPhone 11 Pro. But you see, we're 50 points from the top, centered horizontally 200 by 200. And I can run this app here and you can see. So that is what auto layout does. Again, you tell it how to position itself and it works on all the screen sizes. Now, that was a super easy example. We're going to continue adding elements onto the screen to show you other ways to use it. So let's go ahead and stop our simulators and back to main.storyboard. So that is a UI view. A UI view can just be this, a shape, but you can also put stuff into a UI view. Let's actually grab a label. So you can either hit this plus button, or what I've gotten used to doing is do Command Shift L, and that'll pull this up, Command Shift L. So let's put a label. Except now we're going to put the label inside the UI view. So again, you can have a view that holds other views. And by the way, UI button, UI label are all subclasses of UI view. So now we can actually constrain this label within this UI view. And over here on the left, you see your view hierarchy. So you can see if I minimize my, this is the overall, a view controller comes with a big UI view that covers up the whole screen. But you see we added this UI view here. And you see within that UI view, we have a label. Well, that label's not actually in the UI view. Drag it up here. Now the label is in the UI view. So you can use this view hierarchy on the left to, put stuff within each other to, build your UI. But now that we have this label within the view, we can constrain it inside the view. So let's say we wanted our view, click the TIE Fighter, to be pinned to the left of the container view of the view. So 0, 0, and we hit add two constraints. You're going to see it stretch out, right? It's stretched out to fit the to the edges of the view. And let's say we wanted it to be pinned to the top. Let's say 0 again to the top of the view. Add one constraint. You see it move up. And remember I said labels don't need a height. They have intrinsic content size, based on how big the label is. And then over here on the right, the identity inspector here, attributes inspector, we can name this, orange, right? We're just naming our square here. So we just constrain this to the upper right within this view to show you how you can have, views inside of views. But, that kind of looks weird, upper right. Let's say we wanted that centered. Well, we already have constraints set. So the answer isn't to just set more constraints. The answer is to hit this ruler button to the right of the inspector here, size inspector. And you can see down here, we have constraints. Trailing space to super view, leading space to super view, and top space to super view. Super view is the view that it's in, by the way, right? We put it in this orange view, that is the super view. So what we can do is you can just click on those and delete, right? We don't want it to be constrained like that. So we delete all our constraints, and now let's come back to the alignment constraint, and let's just vertically and horizontally center this in the container. So there you go. There's our label, just vertically, horizontally centered within the container. Now, if it was outside of this orange view, the container would be the view on the screen. So it would be in the center of the screen. But because we're inside the orange view, the label orange is centered in there. So now let's explore some other UI elements here. Command-Shift-L. Let's talk about the text field. So if you want to enter text, grab a text field, pull it here, and now you can see we get this, it's not very wide. Well, if you remember the example I gave from auto layout where I said we want a padding of 30 on the left and 30 on the right, that's how we do that. So click on the TIE Fighter. We don't want to constrain to margin. That'll give us default margins. We don't want to do that. We want to add our own. So safe area, cool. Do not 0, 30. And then same thing over here, 30 for the right, hit add two constraints. And now you see that text field stretch. So there's always a padding of 30. And then let's actually pin this. So we want the top of the text field to be pinned to the bottom of the orange view, which again is this view right here. I know that's confusing because there's two views, but you can see current distance is 71. It's closer. You can also do constraints like this. Let's not add that. If you click on the element, you can control and drag to that view, and then now you can get some constraints here. So we want vertical spacing. So bam, now a vertical space. So there's a couple different ways to set constraints, the TIE Fighter view, and then also, again, control, drag to whatever you want to constrain it to. But now let's take a look at this in action. You can see it on the iPhone 11, right? It stretches out to the edges of the screen with 30 padding. Again, let's run it on the iPhone SE because that's not as wide as the iPhone 11. And you can see it still gives us that 30 padding on the right and the left, but it's a much skinnier text field, as you can see, because again, the screen is wider. So you can see how auto layout helps us adapt our UI elements, again, to the various different screen sizes. And for practice, let's add one more element here. Let's add a UI button. So again, label, button, segmented control, slider, switch. There's so much here in UIKit. Image view, that holds images. Collection view, table view, I'll talk about that in a second. Again, a lot to do in UIKit. We're going just the fundamentals here. So now a button. A button does, again, what you would think a button does. Whatever action you want to attach to the button being tapped, that's what you do. Let's actually pin this one to the bottom here. So again, I'm going to open up my little TIE Fighter and not constrain to margin. So to the bottom here, we want the bottom of the safe area. Let's do 40 points from the bottom. And we want this to be, let's say, a width of like 250. It's good for a button. And we want our button height to be 50. So again, we got our height and width. We're pinning it 40 to the bottom. So let's add those three constraints. There it goes. Now it needs to know where it is horizontally. Again, height, width, X and Y coordinates. That's what auto layout needs to know in order to place it. Those 4 pieces of information. So our button knows its height and width, right? We hard coded that essentially. It knows where it needs to be vertically. We said, 40 points from the bottom. Now it needs to know where to be horizontally. So we're going to say horizontally center in container, add one constraint. So there's our button. Now back to the attributes inspector. Let's start customizing our button a little bit. You can see all the options we have. We don't want it to say button. We want it to say this does nothing because we haven't hooked up an action to it yet. Well, now we get that blue kind of default ugly looking button. Well, let's change that. Let's say our background color down here, we want to make system red button. Well, now that we have a red button, we don't want that blue font. So up here, text color, let's make it white. So we have white. Okay. We can customize even further. The system font, we'll keep it system font, but we'll make it bold, right? And then we'll make it 22 points. So you can see how big it is. Done. You can see you can add an image to a button. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do to customize this button, but here you go. Let's actually run our app now. We'll keep running it on the iPhone SE because you can see what it'll basically look like on the iPhone 11, right? And you see the difference in the screen size. Look at the gap between the text field and the button. Really, really large on an iPhone 11 Pro, right? The new notch phones. You can see how small that gap is on the iPhone SE. And this is a good demonstration. You know, sometimes you'll be designing an app or your designer will design an app and they'll design it for the iPhone 11 Pro, right? That's the new phone. That's what a lot of people have. However, converting that design with all that space to the iPhone SE, where you have like half of that space, is very, very difficult. And like I said, auto layout can do a lot of the work for you, but oftentimes you'll have to go in there and tweak stuff, especially for this iPhone SE. This is like the bane of developers' existence in modern day app development. As you can see, not a lot of space that you get on the iPhone 11 Pro. So the last couple common ones are a table view. We'll be building a table view in a future app, but for now I'll just show it to you because that's a whole tutorial just to build that. A collection view as well. If you've seen like a grid of things like you see on this app, that is called a collection view. Also here on this app, the tab bar at the bottom, that's a UI tab bar controller. That's part of UIKit. There's UI navigation controller we're going to touch on in an app we build. So this was just your introduction into the elements of UIKit. We're going to be using UIKit extensively as we build our future apps in this course. So again, just an introduction. You'll get plenty of practice with the basic elements in future videos. So we just dabbled a little bit in Storyboard, gave you a super basic introduction. Let's talk about, like, should you build your app using Storyboard, how you saw with, it's nice and visual, everything's laid out, or should you build everything in code where you have no visuals, you're just coding everything? That's a hotly debated topic in the iOS developer world, but I'm going to tell you the pros and cons of both. And then later in the course, when we build our apps, you'll get a little taste of building it via Storyboard and building it programmatically. And then hopefully you can start to form your own opinion on the debate. So let's start with storyboards. A lot of the benefits of storyboards are, again, the visual layout that you see here, right? It's nice to see how your app interacts when everything's laid out for you. And it actually hides a lot of UI code, right? Here's an example of just laying out one element programmatically. And you can see there's 4 lines of code to set the 4 constraints. Remember, we talked about typically you need 4 constraints. Well, imagine, laying out a whole screen that has a bunch of elements on it. Like, that's a lot of, UI code that clutters up your files. So that is one upside of Storyboard. Well, depending on how you look at it, it could be an upside, is that a lot of that code is on your storyboard, right? You're not actually coding it, you're setting the constraints there. Whereas, when you do everything programmatically, a lot of your code is that UI code. Now, the reason why I said, depending on your point of view, if that's good or bad, some developers think that when you do all that in Storyboard, you're really like hiding it. Like, it's hard to decipher what's going on in the storyboard. You have to click into a lot of things. Whereas seeing it in code, even though, yes, it is a lot of like cluttered code, but you can see exactly what's going on right away. It's not hidden. So again, you can start to see why there's a debate, right? People have preferences. Another bad thing with storyboards is when you're using them on a team, especially a large team. Like, the larger the team, the more difficult it is to work with storyboards. Now, remember the Illuna example I showed you, we had multiple storyboards, right? So that is a good way to handle this problem. Because what happens if you have one giant storyboard, like you saw that nightmare on the screen? Well, one thing, that's just a nightmare to deal with. But the way storyboards work, if I'm working on a storyboard and a teammate's working on the same storyboard, we're going to have a merge conflict when we go to merge our code, and untangling storyboard merge conflicts are a nightmare, right? Untangling code conflicts aren't that bad, typically. You can get some nasty ones, but they're nothing compared to storyboard merge conflicts. So again, when you're working on the same storyboard, you're going to get those merge conflicts. That is why it's recommended to separate it out into many, many different storyboards. Because if I'm working on the, login storyboard and you're working on the profile storyboard, now we're not going to have conflicts. We're in 2 separate files. No big deal. And another downside of working with storyboards is just the dragging and dropping of elements. For super simple screens, it's nice. I really like it. However, the more complex a UI gets, where you have tons of views and all different kinds of stuff on the screen, it's pretty complex, it's dynamic, there's animations. Storyboard becomes a bit brutal to deal with, to be honest with you. So my opinion is, like, if a screen is super simple, then I tend to prefer storyboard. The more complex it gets, the more I start to prefer to do it in code. So that leads me to some advantages of doing it code. Like I've said before, it's very easy to debug things, right? Everything is right there in code. It's not kind of hidden away in the storyboard. It's also easier to build more complex screens because you're not dealing with dragging and dropping elements on the storyboard. It's also easier to make changes, right? So if I wanted to change the color of a button or the font all throughout my app in storyboard, I would have to go to like each individual element and like change the font of this label, change the font of that label. Like it's annoying to go through and change all the elements. Whereas if you do things programmatically and you can set like here's my app font as a constant, and you use that app font through all your code, now you just have to go to your constants file, change that one font, and it's changed all throughout your code. So building everything in code allows for a lot of flexibility. It's also good for reusability, right? It's very tricky sometimes to copying and paste stuff from the storyboard onto another storyboard or a certain UI element. It's possible for sure. It just can be tricky and a headache. Whereas copying and pasting just a chunk of code and maybe making some small changes, that is super fast and easy. So like I said, building things in code, while it may be a little bit more work up front, right? It's a lot easier to drag an item onto the view controller, constrain it real quick, done, than to like type everything out in code. But again, you're going to get a lot of flexibility when you build it in code. So again, how I feel about it, it's on a spectrum. The easier the screen on that spectrum, the more I prefer to do it in storyboard. If it's just super simple, maybe 2 or 3 elements on the screen, straightforward, I prefer storyboard. Again, as it gets more and more complex, the more I lean towards doing it in code. That's just my opinion. You're going to form your own over time as you build projects in both, but that's a good point. At the end of the day, it's perfectly fine to have a preference. Like, I prefer code, I prefer storyboard. Fine, have your preference. Although a lot of people on the internet are going to tell you you're wrong no matter what preference you choose. That's the internet. But I do think it's very valuable for a developer to know how to do both. And here's why, is because even if you hate using storyboards, you should still know how to do it. Because if you get a job, you get a contract, you join a team, whatever that is, and that project's built in storyboards, like, you're not just going to be able to stomp your feet and say, I'm doing it in code. Like, you're going to have to fall in line and start using storyboard. So that's why I think it's super important to know how to do both. It's going to benefit you greatly to be flexible as a developer. Like, I'm perfectly comfortable with both. You throw me in a storyboard project, I'm good to go. You throw me in a 100% programmatic project, I'm good to go. You throw me in a project that's like a mix of both, I'm good to go. And I think that's what you should strive for. So that's just my take on it. Like I said, it's a hotly debated topic, but I'm hoping in this course I can show you a little bit of both, and you can start to form your own opinions based on experience, not what someone tells you. So, all right, on to the next video. Now that we've learned the basics of the Swift language, let's talk about FizzBuzz. FizzBuzz is kind of like a rite of passage for beginner programmers. It's a short coding problem that oftentimes you'll do when you're just learning a language. So if you ever decide to pick up another language, you'll probably do FizzBuzz in that language as well. But anyway, I'm going to explain the requirements of the problem to you. However, I encourage you to pause the video. Like, of course, we're going to walk through the solution and I'm going to explain everything. But pause the video after I give you the instructions and try to solve it yourself. Here I am in a new playground. Hopefully you can create those by yourself by now. And you can see the instructions here. A little side note in case you're wondering why my comments look different. I changed the color to white. Again, if you remember Xcode, preferences, fonts and colors, you can change your comments. I just changed those to white in case you're wondering how that happened. Okay, so here are the instructions. Write a function that iterates through numbers 1 through 100. And as you're going through that list of numbers 1 through 100, if the number is divisible by 3, print fizz. If the number is divisible by 5, print buzz. If the number is divisible by 3 and 5, like the number 15, that's when you print FizzBuzz with the exclamation point. And then if the number doesn't meet any of those requirements, go ahead and just print out that number. Now, when I'm solving problems like this, oftentimes I'll break out a pen and paper or maybe my iPad and my Apple Pencil, actually get some use out of it. But don't worry about coding this right away when you're trying to solve these problems. Like, again, if you're going to take this on your own, bust out a pen and paper and start kind of scribbling down like some, we call it pseudo code on, what you would do. For example, like if the number is divisible by 3, do this, right? So another hint is that everything you need to solve this problem, we've already covered in previous videos. So if you find that you're solving this problem with stuff we haven't talked about, you're probably doing it wrong. All right, last chance to pause. Don't look it up either. We're going to solve it right here. Don't Google it. So anyway, last chance. Pause right now. After 2 seconds, I'm going to continue. 1, 2. All right, let's go. So let's talk through this first. And again, this is how I would try to tackle these problems, again, with pen and paper in hand to take notes. So, okay, we need to write a function. Okay, so we're writing a function that iterates through numbers 1 through 100. Okay, I see iterates through numbers. I'm thinking a for loop, right, with a range. Okay, so I'm going to write a function with a for loop 1 through 100 to iterate through that. Okay, and then for numbers divisible by 3, print fizz. Okay, so if that number is divisible by 3, I have to print fizz. Okay, so I know how to do an if statement. I know how to print out fizz. How do I know if the number is divisible by 3? Well, do you remember the modulo operator? Well, remember that returns just the remainder? Well, if something is divisible by a number, the remainder is going to be 0, correct? So if you use the modulo operator on the number and the remainder is 0, well, you know it's divisible by 3. Cool, so that's how you handle the is divisible by. So I guess the same thing applies for 5, right? Use the modulo operator on 5. If that number equals 0, print buzz. But now we run into this case here on the third line for numbers divisible by 3 and 5. Okay, because right, if we check for a number that's divisible by 3 and then just move on, well, what if it was divisible by 5 as well? So we can use the and operator to check. Like if, using the modulo operator on 3, equals 0 and modulo 5 equals 0. Cool, now we know it's divisible by both. Okay, so and then of course if the number doesn't meet any of those qualifications, we're just going to print the number. Okay, so it looks like we're using if statements, modulo operators, for loops, and a function, but the order matters. Remember, like I just said, like we can't just check for if it's divisible by 3 and move on. So we should probably check first if it's divisible by 3 and 5. And then if that's not true, then move on to 3, then move on to 5. So that's kind of the order that we're going to do it in. So let's actually start writing this. Func run fizz buzz for I in 1 ... 100. So that's going to go 1 up through 100. So we're going to get all those. Okay, there's my for loop. All right, so now we have our for loop. And it's telling me I haven't used I yet. We're going to use I. Remember, our first check is going to be if it's divisible by 3 and 5. So let's do that. So if I modulo 3 equals 0. So this is us seeing if the number divided by 3 has a remainder of 0. That's what we're saying here. And we want to use the and operator. So and, remember we went over that, I modulo 5 equals 0. So here is this case handled. So now we want to print. This is where we print fizz buzz. We got it. So let's actually test this. So down here, we actually, remember, call your functions. So run fizz buzz. So now let's see if this is working so far. And this is another thing you want to do, is you want to test your code along the way, because if you just spend an hour writing out all this code and then you test it, it's a lot harder to debug if something goes wrong, because you have all this code like, what went wrong? Whereas if you kind of test it along the way, like right now, we only have this small piece of code. So it's very easy to know where the problem is, if there is a problem. So let's run this. And it does print fizzbuzz 6 times, but we don't know what the number is. So let's actually add something here temporarily. So again, string interpolation, I. That will print the number after fizzbuzz. So run it just to check. So 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 90. Yep, those are the ones that are divisible by both 3 and 5. And again, I just wrote that to check. So we know that's working so far. We can delete that. So now we can stop this with this little stop button down there. Okay, so that's the first check. So the next 2 checks are very, very similar, right? Else if I modulo 3 equals 0. So this is the circumstance where we're checking if it's just divisible by 3. So this is where we want to print fizz. And now we do else if I modulo 5 equals 0, print buzz. And you know what? Let's actually keep that in here just to check, right? So again, string interpolation, string interpolation, because this will print the number after it. And then again, string interpolation, just to check. I know that's not part of the instructions, but this will show you that it's actually working like we showed before. And then else, right, if it doesn't meet any of the requirements, being divisible by both 3 and 5, divisible by 3, divisible by 5, we want to print just I. So there's our quick function. Again, let's run through it just to really reiterate. We do a for loop going numbers 1 through 100. If it's divisible by both 3 and 5, that's what we check first. We're going into this. We're printing FizzBuzz. If it's divisible by just 3, we're printing fizz. If it's divisible by just 5, we're printing buzz. If none of that triggers, we're just going to print the number. So now let's run FizzBuzz here, and we'll make this real big so you can see it, right? Scroll up to the top, right? 1, 2, fizz for 3, 4, buzz for 5, fizz for 6, right? And I'm not going to go down through the whole line, but you can see our FizzBuzz is working, and then we get our first FizzBuzz at 15, which again makes sense. So, and you can see we go all the way through 100, doing fizz and buzz if it's divisible by 3 or 5 respectively, and then both. So again, FizzBuzz is a classic rite of passage. You're probably going to see this a lot throughout your programming career when you're just learning other languages, should you decide to explore those. But as always, if you have questions on how we came up with the solution or concerns, leave a comment or hit up the Slack channel. See you in the next video. All right, we're about to build our very first beginner app. We're going to keep it simple, don't worry, but in this video, I'm going to show the overview of what the app is going to be and some of the topics we're going to learn throughout the next couple videos. The functionality is actually very simple. As you see on the screen, we're going to have a table view that populates with 50 random colors. And then when you tap on one of the cells, we're going to pass the data of what that color is to the next screen and change the background color of that screen to the color we selected. Looks super simple, right? But we're actually covering a decent number of topics in this app. For example, we're talking about UI table views. That's a big thing for developers, right? There's table views all throughout apps. That's probably the most common thing you're going to build. We're also talking about UI navigation controllers, for loops, arrays, passing data from one view controller to another. Like that's another big skill. And then also generating random numbers, which we've kind of touched on already. And we're going to create an extension on UI color that will spit out a random color for us. So again, the functionality looks pretty simple, but we're actually covering a lot of topics. All right, let's get right to it. Of course, to start this app, we got to open up a new Xcode project. So pull up Xcode, create new Xcode project, single view application, next. Hopefully you've done this before by now. Product name, we're going to call this Random Colors. And again, team is whatever your team is, organization name, etc. Swift and storyboard. Hit next. And save it to, I'm going to save it to my desktop. You can save it to wherever you like. And I'm going to make my Xcode fill up the whole screen here. Okay, cool. Click on your main.storyboard. And what I'm going to do here, as I make room here for my giant resolution screen, the things I do for you. So you see we get a view controller from the start. We get a view controller file. It's our initial entry point here, as you can see in this arrow. So they do give you a basic setup. I'm actually going to tear all this down and build it back up from scratch because I think that is better for you to understand how this all comes together. So if you click on this storyboard, that bar up there, just hit delete. That'll get rid of that. Click on the viewcontroller.swift file, right click, delete, move to trash. That is gone. Cool. Now you can see we have this empty storyboard here. So what I want to do is hit the plus button, or you can do Command Shift L if you remember, but you can hit the plus button, view controller. There we go. Okay, all my sizing of my screens are all messed up. You go away. Whoa. Yep. Okay. There we go. So here's my one view controller on the screen. You see I no longer have that initial entry. We'll come back to that in a second. But the way the storyboard works is all the view controllers on the screen have to be connected to a file. Remember we had that view controller file. They were automatically connected. Again, I'm going to show you how that works. So in your random colors folder, do Command N to get a new file. Cocoa Touch class. Sometimes we'll do Swift file, which is just an empty Swift file, and we have to type everything ourselves. We're going to do Cocoa Touch class, so that'll fill in some of the boilerplate code for us. I'm going to name this colors table VC. Now I'm doing VC short for view controller. Some people will type out view controller every time. As you can see, that just becomes a really long name. I think it's also redundant. I just do VC. That's a personal style choice. Name it whatever you like. You can see subclass of UI view controller. That's what we want. We don't want to create the zip file, and then the language is Swift. So hit next and create it in your random colors file. Now, I just like to move these up so they're all next to each other. So now back on the main.storyboard, I need to connect this view controller to this color table VC file. The way to do that, make sure you have the view controller selected. Again, I just click on this bar up here. In the identity inspector, which looks like an identity card, you see class. Right now it's just a UI view controller. Well, we need to make this a colors table VC. Hit return. That'll do that. So now this file over here, colors table VC, is connected to this view controller on the storyboard. And you're going to have to do that for all the view controllers that you add. So now we have the view controller that is going to become our table view that has random colors in it. That won't happen for another video or so, but we need to set up the foundation. And the foundation of this app is the navigation, right? We want to be able to tap on a random color and show another screen that has the background color of our selected color. So to get that navigation, we need a UI navigation controller. So to do that, again, make sure you have your view controller selected. You can do editor, scroll down to embed in navigation controller, and you'll see we're going to get these two up here. So you see we have the navigation controller on the left and our colors table VC on the right. Just so we can distinguish, let's click on our colors table VC. Make sure you click on this little circle or that's highlighted. In the attributes inspector, I'm sorry, we have to click on the view, not the overall VC, the view, right? Because we're going to change the background color of this view. So as you can see, we get background color. So let's make this system pink just to show that we have it. And you see now we have a nav bar in our view controller up top. We didn't have that before, but because we're in a navigation controller, now we have that. And if you double click into it, you can also do this programmatically. We'll address that later. Let's just call this colors and hit return. So now we've titled our screen colors. And before we run it, there's one more thing we have to do. Remember that is initial view controller, right? Xcode needs to know what view controller to show first, right? Because right now we just have these two things on the screen. Xcode doesn't know what to show first. So we need to show the navigation controller first because the navigation controller is a container that holds all of our view controllers. I'll dive into that in a second. So click on your navigation controller. And then over here in the attributes inspector, you can see down here is initial view controller. So by clicking this, you see we get this arrow here. So this is telling Xcode, hey, this is the first thing you need to show. So let's actually run this so you can see that in action. Not on Sean's iPhone X, just run it on the iPhone 11 Pro. Run it. And here we are, you can see we have the colors app with the nav bar up top. So you can see the navigation controller is a container that holds this. Let's actually build the next screen before I dive into how the navigation controller works. That way I can actually show it to you on the simulator and it'll make more sense when you can see it in action. So let's stop this and zoom out a little bit. Well, you may not have to. Again, my resolution is just huge. So we need to add another view controller onto this screen. Because remember, this pink screen is going to be our table view that we're going to tap on and show the next screen. So let's do Command-Shift-L, type in view controller, hit return, should put one on the screen, or double click on that, or drag it. Jeez. So now we have this other view controller. Again, the same process. We have to attach this to a file. So in our random colors folder, do Command-N for a new file, Cocoa Touch class, hit next. We want to name this the colors detail VC, and it is a subclass of UI view controller, Swift. Next, save it into your project. Here we have the code. Again, I like to just drag this up so they're there. In the future, as a project gets bigger, you'll create a folder structure. We're not going to dive into that now. But back to our storyboard, now we need to attach this new view controller that we've added to that file. So again, the identity inspector, the class is just blank right now. Let's name it a colors detail VC. Make sure you hit return. Again, if you don't hit return, it's not going to connect it. I've made that mistake before. I'm sure you will too in the future. Hit return. There we go. Now this view controller right here is a colors detail VC. But you'll notice we don't have a navigation bar up at the top. That's because it's not in our navigation controller. Right now, this colors detail VC is just a random view controller floating in the abyss, right? We got to put it into our navigation hierarchy. So what this is called right here, this is a segue. And you can see our navigation controller has a segue to this colors view controller. And this is a special segue, as you can see over here. It is a root view controller. So remember, a navigation controller is just a container. And again, I'm going to explain this more in a bit. So since it's just a container, you have to tell it its initial thing that it's holding, or else you won't see anything. And right now it's holding this pink view controller. That's the root view controller. So now let's add another view controller onto the stack, because again, a navigation controller holds a stack of view controllers. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself with the explanation, but let's connect this. So if you click on this pink view controller, hold Control and drag to this next one, and then let go of the mouse, you'll see segues that you can create. So you can create a show, present modally. So present modally is when it slides up from the bottom. We're going to be doing that in a future app. That is not part of your navigation controller when it slides up from the bottom. It's kind of like a temporary context that shows, and then you swipe it down, and then you're back to what you were doing. Do a show segue, that will put it in the stack of view controllers that the navigation controller is holding. So now we have this segue from the pink view controller that we have here, our colors table VC, to our colors detail VC. Now we need something to trigger that segue. And real quick, if you click on the segue, we have to name this. So let's go to the attributes inspector, because what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, fire off the segue named this. So Xcode knows what segue to use. So here in the attributes inspector, having your segue clicked, name it. We're going to say to colors detail VC. Hit return. Again, make sure you hit return. So now we've named our segue, so we know how to access it. So now we just have to have an action to trigger that segue. When the app is fully built, that's what's going to happen when we tap on a cell. However, we don't have our table view set up, so we need to add a temporary button just to fire this off. We're going to be deleting this later, but I want to show you how the navigation works before we build out the table view. So hit the plus button. Here we have a button. Go ahead and drag the button onto the screen. Just going to put it in the center. I'll zoom in here. I'm not going to worry about crazy constraints. So here in the alignment, I'm going to do horizontally and vertically in container. Hit add to constraints. So now we're going to introduce you to outlets here. So in order for items on the screen to be able to be used in the code, you have to create what's called an outlet or an action. So here we're going to connect this button to our code. So I'm going to move it over here. And in our colors table VC, because remember, that's the code that's attached to this view controller. So here's our color tables VC. Whoops, back to the main.storyboard. If you hold Option and click on the colors table VC, it'll pull up your assistant editor, right? So here we can have the storyboard on the left and then our code on the right for this screen. So now if I click on the button, if you hold Control and drag, you can create, you see insert action outlet. We want to insert an action. So you see the connection is already an action. The object is colors. That's the title of the screen we're on. So we want to name this temp button tapped, right? That's what happened. That's the name of our action. Whenever our temporary button is tapped, this is the name of the function pretty much. The type is a UI button, and touch up inside is the default and sender is the default. That's fine. So hit connect. And now you see we have this code over here, temp button tapped. So whenever our button is tapped, this is the code that's going to execute. So we created an IB action, as you see right here, to connect our interface builder, that's what IB stands for, to our code. And again, whenever the button gets tapped, this is the code that's going to execute in here. So let's execute that code. I'm going to slide this over so it's on one line and looks nice. All the view controllers have a perform segue with identifier function. So if you start typing perform, start typing segue, you're going to get the autocomplete. There it is, the top one. Perform segue with identifier. Again, I'm just going to make more room. It's going to look a little sloppy right now. So remember, this identifier is what we used on the storyboard. Remember, we named it to detail VC. So I'm going to actually go back to the storyboard. I'm going to close out our code real quick, hit this X, and this is just to navigate around screens. So with this segue clicked, if you pull up the inspector, you see we got the to colors detail VC. That's our identifier. I'm going to copy and paste this just to ensure I don't make a typo. And then now let's open up our code on the colors table VC. And now we want to paste that identifier in, right? Because we're saying, hey, perform this VC, and it's a string. So you got to put the quotations around it. And then sender, nil. We don't have a specific sender right now. This is how you can like pass information. We're not going to do that quite yet. So as this reads, whenever our button is tapped on the screen, we're going to perform the segue with identifier to colors detail VC. And again, that is this segue right here that we have clicked is going to be performed. So again, that's what that code does. So now let's run our app. And now when we tap our button, we should perform that segue. And this is where I'm going to start explaining the navigation controller to you as well. So here we can tap our button, and you can see our new detail screen slides in from the right and is on top of our colors VC. So when you hit back, we're back to our colors VC. So again, button to bring in the next screen, back, right? You're probably familiar with this navigation. It's kind of the default navigation for apps. Now let me start explaining the navigation controller. Let me zoom out. So you can see the navigation controller is just a container that holds these two screens. And I always like to compare this to a deck of cards. Imagine your UI navigation controller is holding a deck of cards, and each card represents a screen or a view controller. And as you add new view controllers onto the stack, you're just building up this stack of cards. So when I tap this button, I'm doing what's called pushing a view controller onto the stack. So again, back to the simulator. So right now my navigation controller stack of screens is just holding the pink screen. When I tap the button, now we're pushing a new view controller onto the stack. So right now my navigation controller is holding a stack of screens. At the bottom of the stack is the pink screen. On the top of the stack is the white screen that you see here. So now when you hit back, what you're doing in the navigation controller is you're popping that top screen off of the stack to reveal the bottom screen. And then again, now we're adding that white screen back on top of the stack. And here when I tap back, we're popping that off the top of the stack. So again, if you kind of visualize this deck of cards or a stack of cards, and those are like your screens, all you're doing is adding new cards onto the stack and popping ones off the stack. So that's the fundamentals of how a navigation controller works. I'm going to stop this. We're going to do one more thing to customize this a little bit. If you notice, this is like the old way. We don't have those nice new large navigation titles. So here, if you click on the navigation controller, you see the navigation controller here has an item called the navigation bar. Click on that, and here we can customize that in the attributes inspector. So here we see prefers large titles. Click that. And now we're going to get the large title when we run it. And you already see it on the screen right here. That is the more modern look of the app. So now when we run it, you'll see that that's what we get, right? Colors, that's the more modern look. Button, and then you go, you get that animation up into this back button for free. Do you see that little cool animation, how it animates back and forth? There you go. You get that for free by using the large titles. So that is the basic navigation of our app. We have all that set up. Again, we're going to turn this pink view controller into a table view in the next video. And then in the video after that, we're going to write all the code that does all the logic to finalize the app. In this video, we're going to get the basic table view set up. Now, here you are looking at the project. Hopefully it looks familiar. I left off exactly where the last video left off. I didn't do anything in between. You're looking at exactly where the last video ended. Before we dive into our table views though, I want to clean up some of the temporary stuff we did and also give a little side lesson. So let's get rid of this button here because again, that was temporary. So if you remember in our table VC, we have this code here, right? Temporary button tapped. Well, here's the tricky thing with outlets, right? You're going to have this happen, right? And sometimes people will search forever because they forgot to delete like an outlet. So what happens is if you just delete this code, right? You may think, cool, okay, I'm good to go. But now watch what happens when you run this. Like you may think you've deleted the code that creates your outlet, but if I tap the button, oh man, crash. And it's because you've deleted one half of the equation, right? Our button still has, let me go back to the storyboard, still has an outlet attached to it. So if I click on the button, and you can see them by right clicking, and you can see, this has a touch up inside outlet. So what's happening is even though I deleted the code, when I tap the button, this action is still firing off. So I guarantee you're going to have crashes because you deleted the code and you didn't fully delete them. So you have to hit this X button to get rid of this action, to get rid of that outlet. So now once you delete that, now you can finish everything off. Well, I guess just deleting the button would also have taken care of that, but oftentimes you may just want to delete the action there. So now we can delete the button and get rid of that. So again, just keep that in mind. That is one tricky thing with outlets is you have to delete like both sides of the equation, meaning the actual storyboard implementation and also what's in your code. So, okay, we've gotten rid of that. Now let's take our colors VC and click on that. Click on the view because we're going to get rid of this pink background here. So background is going to be just system color, system background color. So the system background color, if you use that rather than just white, that's what will change to black and white if you go from dark mode to light mode automatically. Okay, so here we just have our basic app. Now let's start building our table view. So to do that, let's actually zoom in here. Again, you can hit the plus button, type in table view. Now you see, you're going to get a table view controller. This kind of does a lot for you. However, I'm not a fan of these. You may see some tutorials out there if you're searching for table views that use a table view controller because a lot of the stuff is done for you. However, what I found in my experience is that they are extremely restrictive. If you want to create anything custom with them, it's just a pain in the butt. So I always take the extra minute or two to build my own custom table view. That way I have all the freedom in the world, right? I'm not like restricted. Just my take on it. You may hear differing opinions, but anytime I've tried to use a table view controller, I've regretted it. So we're going to do it the custom way so you have the freedom. So here we want to take this table view, drag it onto here. And you see we're just going to get it there. Now we want to constrain this to the full screen. So by clicking on the table view, so we click on our TIE Fighter down here, and we don't want to constrain to margins. Make sure we click that off because we don't want to have a built-in margin. So here we want to constrain it to the view, which is going to be 0. We want it to pin it right to the bottom of this colors navigation bar. Same thing here, view, 0. And again, we're not messing with the safe area, so make sure you hit view, 0, because on the bottom, the safe area would be right above the home button indicator, and our table view would just stop right above the home button indicator. And just, we want it to look like it fills up the whole screen. You'll see what I mean once we have this built, and I'll try to remember to point that out. So once you have all 4 of those constraints, no constraint to margin is clicked, hit add 4 constraints, and you can see it filled up the whole view. That's what we want. And then with our table view selected, hit prototype cells equal to 1, just puts a cell on there. And then now the key thing to remember with table views, oftentimes people will forget, you need to set the data source and delegate. Let me talk through those and we'll come back and explain it. So the way to set those delegates here is by clicking on the table view, and I kind of like to do it from here, from the navigation screen here. So control, drag, and drag it to this circle to this view controller. What we're doing here is we're setting the colors table VC as the delegate and data source to this screen. So we're connecting the two. So if you let go of your mouse button here, you're going to see outlets. You can do data source and delegate. And I believe if you hold shift, you can click on both. Maybe not. I know there's a shortcut to this. I don't do this very often. So you can see the dot next to it. That means we've set our delegate. And now if you click on data source, let's just hold control, drag to double check. Yep, we have our data source and delegate. Cool. So if your table view is not working, oftentimes it's because you forgot to set your data source and delegate. Let's go back to the table VC code and show you how these two things come into play. So click on the colors table view. Now here, let's delete this code. Our colors table view VC has to conform to those now. So now you do UI table view delegate, you see there, and then UI table view data source. There it is. So by adhering to these two, now we've connected our table view, but we're getting an error that says it does not conform. So if you click on these, you're going to see we want to add the protocol stubs, fix. If I'm going too fast, I'm going to come back and explain this. It's just tough to explain it before I show it. Okay, so that added this to the top. We don't want that in that order. So Command X, you want view to load to be at the top because that's like the first thing that happens in your view controller. And as a matter of fact, now that you see this structure, I'm going to introduce what I like to do. So this is like conforming to delegates here at the top. If I'm conforming to a delegate, I like to write an extension on my class, and this is purely for code organization. So I like to do extension colors table VC, and then here I want to conform to these two. So we'll do Command X, Command V. We're doing the same thing we just did. We're just organizing it a little more. This is all this is. This is code organization. So now I want to cut these table view functions that we just got and put them in here. So this way you'll see all my normal code for my view controller, which you'll see will play out later in videos, is up here in this view controller. Everything that has to do with the table view is down here in my extension that conforms to the UI table view delegate and data source. Okay, so what are the delegate and data sources? Let's start with the data source here. So the number of rows in section. Our table view needs to know how many rows to show, right? We know it's going to be 50. So for right now, we can return 50. And the reason I'm returning 50 is you can see here, this function returns an int. So I have to tell it how many rows, again, an int. So we're going to create a blank table view for now with 50 rows. Eventually, we're going to make this be however many colors are in our array, right? Because we want it to be dynamic. For now, again, just to set up the structure, we're going to put 50. So that has to do with the data source here. Now this is the delegate, self-row at index path. You're going to become very familiar with this function the more table views you create. This is what's called a delegate method. And a simple way, I'm not going to get too deep into delegates. That's a pretty complex topic that a lot of beginner developers struggle with. But just to know the concept of a delegate, I think is beneficial. So the concept of a delegate is, to put it really simply, picture this function just sitting back and waiting for something to happen. When that thing happens, this function acts. Remember how we used to have to always call our functions? Remember, if I wrote run fizzbuzz, I would have to actually call run fizzbuzz to get that function to run. Well, delegate methods are automatic. You don't have to actually call them to run them. Remember, they're waiting for an action, and when that action happens, they run automatically. Delegate methods. Again, that's a much deeper topic. Trying to give you a big picture overview. So the way this delegate method works is self row at index path. Every time a cell appears on a screen, this function gets called. So imagine you're scrolling through a table view. This function is getting called all the time, right? Because new cells are coming on the screen. So this is where you customize the cells as they come on the screen. We're going to get into that in the logic section of the next video, but I wanted to at least let you know what that does. And again, I'm going to go over that once we have all the code filled in and you can see it in action. But for now, we're just going to return, and you can see, but real quick, I need to return a UI table view cell. So for now, we're just going to return a new empty table view cell, right? That's what this does. I'm initializing a blank table view cell. Again, we're just setting up the structure. In this function is where we would actually set the color it's supposed to be. Again, more on that in a later video. So again, to review these table view methods, this is what tells me how many numbers of rows I need to show, and this tells me what to show in those rows. And like I said, this delegate method just happens automatically. The reason it can happen automatically is because, remember, back in the storyboard, this is why we set the delegate in data source. Remember how we had to connect the view controller to the table view? Well, this is what's telling the table view like what to watch. So that's how that delegate method fires off automatically. So let's run this and see what we got. So here, as you can see, we have the empty table view. We got our colors. You can see the table view bars. And if I slide up, you can see we're scrolling through 50 different rows. Right now, they're all blank. We got to fill it in with colors. But this is just setting up the general structure of our table view. And now, actually, let's go back. And because right now, when we tap on a cell, nothing happens, right? We're selecting it, but nothing happens. So let's close this. And let's go back to our colors table VC. And again, another delegate method that we can implement is, if you just start typing did select, you'll see did select row at index path. Be careful. There is one that's called did deselect. Don't want that. That's another error that a lot of people make sometimes. So did select row at index path. And now here's where we want to, again, just like we did with our button. Remember I said we were going to replace that button with when you actually tapped on the row. We're going to do perform segue with identifier. It was to detail to color. I'm living dangerously right now, and I'm kind of hoping it crashes. I'm going from memory on what we named this, to colors detail VC. I hope that's right. But if I'm wrong, it's going to crash. And this is the danger of kind of like using the strings, and why I always went back and copied and pasted in the name of the segue that we're firing off. So again, when we tap on a row, we're going to fire off that to details VC. So now let's run it and see if we got our navigation working. So again, here's all of our cells, right? I'm scrolling up and down. Let me tap on a cell. Nope, didn't crash. That means I got the name right. And you see, now we pushed the detail VC onto the stack, and eventually this is going to be whatever color we selected. But again, we're just building the basic foundation in the navigation of our app. So again, we got the basic structure of our table view down. Tap on a row, there you go. Now we just need to fill in the logic on, generating random colors to fill each cell. And then when we tap on that cell, we want to pass whatever color we tapped over to this view controller so it knows what color to set its background color to. All right, let's move on. In this video, we're going to start writing all the logic to populate the random colors in our table view. And again, my project has left off exactly where the last video left off, so you didn't miss anything. Here we are in the colors table VC. So let's think about what we need, right? We're going to need 50 random colors. That's what we got to populate it with. Now, table views always take an array, right? So remember, an array is a list of items. So we're going to need an array of random colors, and our table view is going to populate based on that array. So let's create that array first, and just keep that in mind. Table views and collection views, they need an array of something to show. Right? For example, here on the screen, you see a list of my followers on GitHub. Well, in order to populate that collection view, I need an array of followers, right? So that's why table views and collection views are always going to need an array. So let's create that array. So var colors, and that's going to be an array of UI color, and that's going to equal right now an empty array. So to populate that array, we need to create 50 random colors. So to do that, we need a for loop that iterates 50 times, creating a different random color each time, and then appending that color to our colors array. Okay, so let's do that here. Let's create a function, func create random colors, and close. So for I in 0 dot dot up into 50, because remember, if I did 0 to 50, that would give me 51. So up to, but not including 50 is what that less than sign means for the ranges. So this is going to count 50 times. And again, we're not going to be using the I, so we can do the underscore. It just takes the I out of it, basically meaning we're not going to use the name of the variable. So here we want to create a random color. Okay, how would we create random colors? Well, rather than writing that here in our for loop, let's actually break it out again to keep the code nice and compartmentalized, and also to help you learn, because you can see how all the chunks of code come together. So I'm actually only going to do one space in between functions. Normally I do 2 spaces, but because my screen is so blown up, that takes up a lot of space. So let's do func create random color, and we want this to return a UI color, right? Because again, this is kind of like a little factory. So real quick, return UI color. That's just a blank one. That's temporary, so Xcode doesn't yell at me with an error. But this is going to be like a factory that we're going to run it, and it's going to spit out a random color. And again, that's why we're spitting out UI color. So here, let's say let random color equals, and here's how you initialize a UI color. So UI color, and you can see we can do, there's many different ways to do it with like hue, display P3, named. I like to do the red RGB basically. So we need a red value, which is a CG float, green. And the CG float value is a value from 0 to 1, right? Like all zeros is black, I believe. All ones are white. Yeah, I think I got that right. We want a random color. So what we want is a random float from 0 to 1.0, right? It could be 0.76, right? And they combine those numbers. So what I can do is CG float, and we've done this with the int, right? Dot random, and we want a range of 0 up into 1.0. And we want to include 1.0, or just 1. So that is going to give us a random float for the red, and let's actually put this, you can do this with functions, by the way. You can separate them by parameters, so it lists them out, because how that was a pretty long one. So now let's actually do this multiple times here. This is going to give us alpha is opacity. So if you have alpha of 0, you're not going to be able to see it. If you have alpha of 0.5, it's going to be like faded out. You're going to be able to see through it halfway. Or 1 is full opacity. We want 1. So here we're creating a random color, right? CG float.random. And then now we want to return that random color. Random color. And again, if you have any questions about this function, feel free to leave a comment in the Slack. Again, we just needed a value for red, green, and blue, and that value has to be from 0 to 1. So again, 0.25, 0.48, right? So we're just creating a random value from 0 to 1. So it could be anything random, and then we're going to combine those to get our random color. So this create random color function is what spits out that random color. So now what I can do is up here in our for loop, I can do colors.append, right? Because we want to add a new color every time this for loop goes. And we're adding it to this colors array up here on 13. So we need to pass in a UI color. You can see that's what I need to pass in. Well, here, this create random color function spits out a UI color, returns one. So I can do create random color in this function up here. Tighten this up a little bit. So here, what this function does, called create random colors, was actually, let's call it before I forget, create random colors. That happens in view.did.load. So view.did.load happens as soon as the screen is loaded into memory. So it's like one of the first thing that happens in your view controller. Oh man, I named these poorly. Good example of how naming is important, right? You see how this is create random color, this is create random colors. Let's call this add random colors, just to really like, whoops, differentiate them. Because see, I put in the wrong function there. That's what happened there. So in view.did.load, we're adding random colors. So that's what's happening here. And then every time this for loop goes, we're going to call create random color, which is going to fire this off, which is going to generate the random colors. So in view.did.load, what happens is our colors array gets filled with 50 random colors. So now that we have our array, we can use that in our table view, right? So down here in our table view methods, remember we put them in the extension, instead of returning 50 for number of rows in section, we can return colors.count. Remember we wanted to make this dynamic. However many colors are in our color array, that's how many rows we want. So instead of passing in a hard number of 50, colors.count, that number is going to be 50, again, because we're appending 50 colors into that. So now, remember, the table view needs to know how many rows I need to show and what I need to show in each row. So in order to tell it what to show, we need to write some code here in our self_row@indexPath method. So to do that, we need to get access to a variable called cell. So we're going to create that. Let cell equal tableview.dequeue, see reusable cell with identifier. So our cell has to have an identifier here, just like our segue. I'll come back and explain this function in a second once I get this string. So again, in our main.storyboard, click on your cell here, your prototype cell that we added, table view cell here. In the right pane, we're going to have the identity inspector, the attributes inspector. And you see the table view cell, we have an identifier. This is the reuse identifier. Again, more on that in a second. So we just want to name this color cell, right? Keep it simple. Again, I'm going to copy and paste that. Make sure you hit return. That's what actually makes it go. Trust me, so many times I've forgotten to hit return and things weren't working. Silly little error, but it happens. And go back to our code here in the colors table VC. So now I'm going to paste in that string that I just copied, color cell. So now we have this variable called cell, which is our dequeue reusable cell with the identifier of colored. So what cell reuse means is basically the table view controller. Remember, we have 50 rows. Let's actually, I'm not going to run it yet. My code's broke, but I'll put up a picture on the screen. This table view has 50 rows. However, it's not all 50 rows that are populated, right? The iPhone is smart enough to only use what's visible, right? Imagine if you had a table view of 1,000 random colors. Well, that's not all going to get populated right away. That would be poor memory usage. You would get poor performance out of that. So what the iPhone does is it only uses what's being shown. So as you're scrolling, down, as soon as a cell falls off the screen, it gets rid of its data and is ready to be reused for the new cell that comes on the screen. So again, if you had 1,000 rows of cells, only like 12 to 15, I'm just saying what is visible on the screen are cells that are actually being created. So new cells are constantly being created as you're scrolling up and down. That's why this self_row@indexPath function that we're looking at here fires off all the time. So that is what is a reusable cell. That is a little bit more of an advanced topic, right? I just kind of gave a little overview. I mean, it's not super advanced, right? Like developers should know that. But again, this course is like your very first exposure to this world. Might be a little advanced for that, but yeah, you may have to do a little bit more research on reusable cells. But that's what we're doing here, is we're getting that reusable cell. So now we need to get a color to tell this cell like what color it is. So let's say let color equal, and we're going to do colors. This is how, remember, we can access a certain location in the array. So here's where we would pass in an int. Remember I showed you this, like if I put in 0 here, this would be the first available color in our array. If I did 1, this would be the second color. 2, this would be the third color, and so forth. Because remember, arrays are 0 indexed. So all we're doing right here is instead of passing in the actual int, like hard coding, 48.5, no, we want to make this dynamic. And by making it dynamic, we pass in indexPath.row. So the index path we're getting is right here. This is part of the delegate method, right? Xcode knows this automatically. So even though the iPhone is not creating 1,000 cells like we just talked about, we still do have all the index paths, right? And the index path relates to the number of cells we have. For example, indexPath.row, when indexPath.row is 0, that's our very first item in the colors array. So what we're doing here by passing in indexPath.row is whatever row we're on, send that number. If we're on row 47, indexPath.row will equal 47. If we're on row 4, indexPath.row will equal 4, and that's how we'll know what color to pull out of the array. Again, if we're on row 4, remember this method is being called constantly, all the time as you're scrolling. So if the one time it gets called, again, we're on row 4, it's the same thing as it being like this, right? And we're going to pull that color at that index out of the array. So hopefully that made sense. Again, feel free to ask questions in the comments, not row, in the comments or the Slack channel, because this is a confusing part. But once you understand this, you're really going to understand table views. So again, feel free to ask questions. Happy to explain this further. So now we have our color that we want. So now we can do cell.background color equals color, the color that we just pulled out right here. And in fact, if you wanted to, like, I broke that out so you could see what was going on. If you wanted to write this code, smaller, you could just do background color equals colors.indexpath.row and not even have this line of code. And that's probably how I would write it, if I was writing a real code base. But I wanted to break the steps out so you could see what was happening. So now instead of returning just a blank normal table view cell, we want to return cell. Remember, this is the cell that we created up here on line 49, and then we told it what background color to be, and then now we are returning that cell. So I'm going to tighten that up right here. So now when we run this, we should be getting, oh, it's an optional. So, okay, good call there, Xcode, forgot to do that. So here, this returns an optional. Like, let me actually retype this and slowly so you can see it. So I can do table view.dequeue reusable cell with identifier. You can see right here that cell isn't optional in case it doesn't exist. So if you want to be, again, the easy thing to do is just to do bang because we know it's going to exist. Remember, that's the lazy way of force unwrapping the optionals. And you're going to see developers do that. You're going to see that in code bases, but we're going to do it the right way real quick here. So what we should do is guard let, this is how we're going to unwrap the optional, cell equals table view.dequeue reusable cell with identifier string. And then that string we're going to pass in, again, was color cell. Hoping I don't make a typo here. And then else, so this is what happens if this is nil. This is the power of the guard statement. And a little bit of a review here. We can return just a blank UI table view cell, and it'll just give a blank one, but it won't crash. The guard statement allows us that early exit, right? That return. So again, if for some reason our cell with identifier color cell is nil, like say in our storyboard, we accidentally delete that cell, this will still, the app's not going to crash, which is what it would have done. It will just return blank table view cells. Still not the experience you want, but your app's not just going to crash randomly and you have no idea what happens. So again, the way the guard statement works is now that we've declared cell, we have access to cell out here. Like we already used, and I don't have to, make it an optional. And now Xcode's not going to tell me to unwrap the optional because we unwrapped cell up here. So a little optional review there. So let's run this, and we should get random colors in our array. There we go. Yep, random colors. And as we scroll, 50. So what I was talking about here, like the dequeue reusable cell, like, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Hopefully I didn't miscount that. 16 cells, right? So this self-row at index path function, right, was called 16 times in the beginning. And then as I'm scrolling, it's constantly getting called. It's getting called. It's getting called. And we're setting the background color to that cell. But again, we're not creating 1,000 cells. We're only creating the cells we need. And that's for performance reasons. And again, back to the, remember our constraint, we wanted to constrain the bottom not to the safe area. We wanted it to fill up the whole bottom view. I just think that looks nicer how we're filling up the whole view. Whereas if we put it to the safe area right above this home screen, let me actually show you that. You'll see what I mean by it. It doesn't look that great. And I'll show you how to edit constraints here too. So clicking on our table view, opening up the right pane, click on the ruler to the right of that. You can see our constraints down here. So you see bottom space to super view. Let's actually delete that. And now we're gonna have to create that again. So let's do bottom space. Whoops, it's got to be, it's kind of content aware, like it knows it's below the safe area. So we move it, drag it up a little bit. Now when we pin it to the bottom here, we have the safe area as an option, and we want it to be the safe area and 0. So add one constraint. You see how it stopped right above our home button? Now watch when I run this. And you're going to see this with all your table views. And I always recommend pinning them to the view, most likely. But now you see when we scroll, we always have that like white bar at the bottom because we pinned it to the safe area. So that's an example of the safe area on the bottom. Again, I think it looks cleaner and nicer when all of our colors like fill up the whole screen. So let's do that again here. So again, we can delete the align bottom to safe area, delete that. And I mean, you can probably edit it. I always find it just safer to just delete it and redo it. So again, the bottom, we want to pin to the view, not the safe area, in 0, hit add one constraint. Now when we run it again, you're going to see how it just looks better, right? It fills up the whole phone. Just looks a lot better than that. So now what we haven't set up is passing the data to the next view controller. So watch when I click a color, we're just white because we're not actually passing that data. So that is the final piece of the puzzle, if you will. Oh, and also a new fun shortcut, Command-Shift-A on your simulator will change the dark mode real quick. Thanks to Jason for pointing that out. So you can test it what it looks like in dark mode, and then Command-Shift-A to go back to light mode. Little fun fact there. Okay, so now let's work on passing the data. So back into our, well, actually, let's go to the color detail VC first. So what we need here is a variable called color. So let's do var color. Now we're not initializing it with anything, a specific color yet, and say this is of type UI color, and it's an optional. Because we're waiting to pass the data, right? This detail VC is waiting to receive what color it needs to show. So that's why this is an optional. If for some reason you use this view controller and it's not receiving a color, you don't want to force unwrap it just in case. So make it an optional. And then, so now our colors detail VC has this variable called color. So in our colors table view, here in did select row at, remember this is what happens when we tap on it. Again, we can create our color just like we did above here. We can do let color equals colors. And then again, where do we want to access, right? We don't want to access 4, 5. We don't want to like hard code that. We want to do the same thing. Index path dot row. So again, this is whatever row we tap, that's the number we're going to pass into our color. And now remember before I said we don't have a sender yet. So now the sender in our segue is going to be color. So now whenever you're doing some custom stuff in your segue, you have to write a little bit of code to handle that. Before we didn't because we were just showing the screen. We weren't passing any data. So the code that handles your segue is a function, and we're going to do this up here, back up in our view controller. Let's actually clean up some space here. Is a function called prepare for segue. So if you start typing prepare, this is already built in, and you can see we get it down here. Prepare for segue. And here we need to like designate our designation. So I always call this dest VC for destination VC. So let dest VC, again short for destination VC, equals, and you can do segue because we have this being passed in as a parameter. So our segue has a destination view controller here that is a property. So segue.destination. Now, so this is saying wherever our segue is pointed to, that's what I want this dest VC to be. And we want access to this so we can set the color. And the thing is, like, let me delete destination, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. You destination, you can see it is of type UI view controller. So that's just a generic UI view controller, not our custom one. Now, if you remember back in the colors detail VC, we have our specific colors detail VC that's a subclass of UI view controller. And this colors detail VC that's a subclass has a special variable called color that not a normal view controller doesn't have this color variable that we put in. So back in the table VC, I have to, this is called casting. I have to cast this regular view controller as a colors detail VC. And by doing this, this is letting this variable know, hey, you are of type colors detail VC. And once I know that I have access to that colors variable that most normal view controllers don't have. So now I can do dest vc.color, and you see it's an optional. And now I have access to that color variable again because we've casted it as a colors detail VC equals sender. And you see sender when I type that. Let's do that. Sender is of type any. We won't get into this quite yet, but I'll give you a high level overview. Basically, you see when I pass in a sender, that means it can be any type. But when you pass in any type, what this function is basically saying is like, hey, just give me an object. I don't care what type it is, but when I give you this object back, I'm not going to tell you what type it is. You have to know what type it is. So again, by passing color down here as the sender, we pass it in, but when we use it up here, we have to say, okay, this is a UI color as a UI color. So let's run through that real quick. What happens when I tap the row, we're going to get the specific color based on the row that I tapped. That's what's happening here. And then we're going to perform the segue with identifier. And then we're going to have a sender of the color that I just created right here on line 59. So that also kind of triggers this prepare for segue. So we're creating a destination view controller. We have to cast that regular view controller as a colors detail VC so we can get access to the special properties of the colors detail VC, which in this case is just color. And then we are setting the color here on this destination VC as the sender that we passed in, the random color that we tapped. Now, if we go to our color detail VC, we're going to have this color passed. but we have to use that color, right? This is passing the data. We pass the color from the table view screen to our detail screen, and that is going to be captured in this variable called color. So now what we need to do is use that color. So we need to unwrap because this is an optional. So we can do, we'll do nil coalescing right now just to show you the various ways to unwrap an optional. So we can do view.background color equals color, that the variable right here, but you're going to see it's an optional. So we need to give it a default value. Remember, this is nil coalescing. So this is saying if color has a value, use the color we pass in. However, if it's nil, we're going to use a default value, and we're just going to say UI color dot, let's call it blue. And actually, I believe we don't even need to do the UI color. We can just do dot blue because background color knows it's a UI color here. So let's get rid of this, these comments, this boilerplate code here. So again, to review, we've used Guardlet here to unwrap this optional, and I've used nil coalescing here to unwrap the optional. You could have done it, with iflet. You could have done it with Guardlet. I know you're probably thinking right now, well, when do I use which type of unwrapping? There's really no like hard and fast rules. It's kind of like use the right tool for the right job. And unfortunately, you're not really going to know that until you get more experience. But this is a quick and easy way to unwrap this optional here where we want to give it a default value, right? Okay, so let's run this and see what we get. So again, here's our random colors. Very bluey greeny here at the top. Okay, cool. So let's pick, let's pick this purple right here. Bam, we passed the purple here, and now we have this back button with colors. So back, here we are, back here, back to the top, tap on this green, the very first one, and now we pass that color green and set it to the background color. Now, one thing I'm not sure if you noticed, but this may throw you off, right? Let's run it again. So you see we have this color at the top. It's like a maroon brown, I don't know, it looks weird. If you click on it, it turns gray. Right, and we go back, oh, now it's gray. Why is that? Now let's click on this green one. Now let's click on the black one right here. That turned gray. Now let's go black. It's gray. That is because we have a selection highlighted, meaning whenever we tap the cell, it highlights that cell. So what we can do here is in the main storyboard, and if you click on the cell, you can do selection where it's blue. I don't know why it's clicked on blue when it's showing up gray, but you can do none. So that means when you tap on the cell, it's not going to turn a specific color. So now let's stop this and run it. Now when we tap on a cell, it's not going to change color. So let's tap on this orange one at the top. You tap on it, you notice it didn't change color, whereas before it was changing to gray. Let's test it again here on this purple one. Purple, back to purple, it didn't go gray. And again, you've probably seen this in other apps where you tap on a cell and it like turns gray to show you that it's selected. So that is one potential confusing thing with our colors app. Because our entire cell is a color, we're kind of changing the color of the cell. So one quick little fix. Another thing I want to talk about before we finish this video, and this is the last thing, is a little bit of refactoring. And I want to talk about this throughout the apps to give you a little taste of it. So what we can refactor here is this create random color, right? This is a function that the view controller doesn't need to know about this. We can make an extension on UI color, so we can do UI color.random, like how we do UI color.blue.red. We can do .random, that way it spits out a random color, and we can get this function out of our view controller, and it also makes that code reusable no matter what view controller or screen we're on. Whereas by putting this code in the colors table VC, this code is only accessible in that VC. Well, getting a random color, I don't know, maybe we're doing a big time colors app, maybe we want to use that throughout our app. So let's create a colors extension to add this functionality to UI color and not have it be contained to our colors table VC. So here in your folder, do Command N for a new file. This time we are going to do a Swift file, hit next. And I always name my extensions the type, so UI color plus ext for the extension, hit create. Now you see we have colors plus ext. And here we need to import UI kit because it's UI color, remember? So import UI kit. And just so you know, UI kit also imports foundation. So if you have import foundation and import UI kit, that's redundant. So here we can do extension UI color, and here's where we can add some functionality. So let's go back to our table VVC, and we're just going to literally cut and paste. We got to make some changes. So Command X, space that out. So again, that cleans up our view controller, gets a lot of that code out of there. We'll come back to this error in a second. That'll be fixed. So go back to our color extension. Now let's paste this in here. This needs to be a static func, so every single UI color has this. And then we don't want to say create random color. We can be a little bit more simple. We can just name it .random. So when we use it, we can just do UI color.random. And that's it, right? So clean up some spacing here. So now we have a function on UI color that will generate a random color. So all we did was literally just take that code, refactored it out into a UI color extension. By making it static, that means every instance of UI color will get it, not a specific instance of it. So if we go to our colors table, we see now that we don't have this create random colors, I'm just going to rewrite this whole line so you can see what happens here. Colors dot append, and again for the type safety, right? It's expecting a UI color. So because it knows this is going to be a UI color, I can just do dot random. Again, just like I could have done dot blue or dot red, right? We're kind of adding a new color to our repertoire, except it's a random color, dot random. So there we go, colors append dot random. And again, now you see we've cleaned up this view controller. We've refactored that code out into our UI color extension. And again, that spits out a random color here. So again, a little bit of refactoring. In the next video, you're going to see, more refactoring. But actually, you know what? One more thing. Refactoring is fun. I enjoy it. So back to, remember how I said these identifiers that are strings are a little bit dangerous? Because if you have a typo, if I just do two colors detail VC, right? I just deleted that A. That's all, right? Now let's run it just to show you. Now when I try to go to the next screen, bam, crash, right? Something as little as that will crash your app. So this is what we call stringly typed. Again, that's not an official term. It's kind of like some slang. So what we can do is we can create constants for these names, right? And you'll see here what we can do is we can create an enum. So another purpose of an enum is to kind of have constants called cells. And we'll create another enum called segues. So, we have a pretty simple screen where we're only dealing with one table view cell and we only have one segue coming from here. Oftentimes you will have one screen pointing to a couple different screens depending on the user's behavior. So you may have multiple segues. But what we can do here is we can create, again, a static let, call it color cell equal color cell. So we're just kind of putting that string into a name. And it may look like it's redundant, but you'll start to see the safety here. So static let to detail equal, and we'll get this to detail colors VC, right? And you can name it whatever you like here. So you're going to see the safety here in a bit. So you define your segues, your cells, and again, it's not uncommon to have a screen with multiple segues and multiple different cells, not uncommon. So now when I go to write in what identifier I want to use, instead of typing a string and risking a typo, I can do cells dot, and you see I get autocomplete, color cell, cells.color cell. Cool. Same thing down here with segues. Instead of, typing in my strings for the segues, I can do segues dot to detail. So now you can see you get the autocomplete. You're not going to risk a typo. And if you're using this color cell in like multiple places, you don't have to type it out each time. You got it in there in the constant. So that's another nice little refactoring bit that I like to use. So anyway, that wraps up this app. We're going to move on to our next app. We're going to build it first in Storyboard, and then you're going to get your first taste of no storyboard, 100% programmatic UI. Should be fun. Let's go.